The broadcast is live, except it says you. It usually says the broadcast is live. Now, I guess since I'm hosting it, it says you are live. Alrighty.
All right.
How's everyone doing tonight? We got Scott and Paolo with us. We're usually on Tim Howlermouse's channel, but he's off, I don't know, Labor Day weekend. He's actually doing something.
It's gallivanting around.
How crazy is that?
Yes.
Doing something. Who does anything anymore?
Well, this is not Labor Day weekend here.
It's all right.
It's not Labor Day weekend here because we're communists and we celebrate Labor Day on May 1st.
But if it was, you'd be out doing something, just like Tim, right?
Yeah, or not. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. I have no idea. Probably have to live in a big city because I really don't. I don't like places where you have houses with picket fences. I'm used to high-rise buildings. Even a city with a population of 50,000 must have high-rise buildings only.
How large?
Sorry. And I was just saying, it's funny around here since the nearest city to me, I'm in the suburbs, is New York City. So it's like everybody I grew up with would always go to some other city and say, "Oh, it's not that big." And I'm like, that's because you're used to going to New York City. That's why. Right. I mean, it's a good sized city. You're just comparing it to New York. I mean, that's a little everything in the country is not that big when compared to New York City.
Yeah, unless you're from Mexico City or Tokyo, then it's like
one of those big cities around the world.
Right.
But it's like, but that I always found that funny when people would say that. Well, it's not really that big. I'm like, a million people.
There's a Brazilian author who moved to Portugal a few years ago, and he said that he finds it very odd that in Portugal we say that we have a very long trip if we have to visit relatives 2 hours away, right? Because it took him 2 hours just to leave São Paulo.
Right.
Which has a population of almost 25 million.
Right. That's like I always say when it comes to New York City, I always say too, people from who live in New York City, and especially natives or people who move there, know more about other big cities than they know about the area around New York City, because it's like easier to get to Boston than it is, any little town or city outside of New York City. So it's kind of like they don't know. And it's like I live like 30 miles from New York City. No one in New York knows it exists. It's like no one ever comes here from New York City just about, because it'd be too much of a pain.
So it's further away than Yonkers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yonkers is right on the edge of New York City.
So that's practically redneck country.
Yeah, exactly. I have been called a hillbilly a lot of times.
Right. Because it's something that I find weird about New York State. It has nothing to do with New York City.
Right.
And if I recall correctly, the last remaining rebel city from the Civil War was actually New York State.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Well, see, I live in Virginia, and about 90% of the Civil War was fought in this state.
Yeah.
Yeah. The South shall rise again, but it's only Virginia.
New York City had draft riots during the Civil War. Yeah, they did. They didn't want to go off and fight the Civil War. They didn't want to go to Virginia and, by God, die. So anybody read any good comics this week?
I haven't read any, but I ordered some.
What'd you order?
I ordered some Dan Dare books that I don't have.
Dan Dare, he British?
British, kind of an analog of Flash Gordon, Buck Rogers, but more set in probably 40s, 50s time frame, a little bit further down. And then I also ordered some of the Valerian hardcovers that I don't have.
I just started watching the Valerian movie. I'm watching it old man style, so I'm watching it in segments.
Segments, gotcha.
Yeah. I actually watched it while riding my stationary bike a couple of times on rainy days. So I'm really enjoying it. Visually, it's just wonderful.
Right. Once we get done with the podcast, I'll send you a link to a site that shows you just how large of an influence Valerian was on the visual development of Star Wars.
Yeah, I'd heard it was very influential to Star Wars.
Very
I've
much
only
so.
read a little Valerian. I've got a friend, my friend Bunch is a big Valerian fan, so he's given me a couple of graphic novels over the years, but I haven't delved into it more than that.
Yeah. So I'm one hardcover way of having a complete set of the Valerian series, and that one is very, very hard to find now.
How many hardcovers is it?
7 total.
7? Okay.
Yeah.
How many? How big are the hardcovers?
I don't remember page-wise what the count is, but I think each one of them includes about 5 or 6 comics.
Okay, and those are usually about 60 or 80 pages, right? Is it that? Is it like
really
300 or 400 pages, or
no,
200 pages?
It's closer to 200. Yeah,
closer to 200 pages.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think by that time those albums were only 44 pages of story.
Yeah, they're released. Okay. They're released in the European album format, not like a traditional mainstream.
Paolo had an interesting comment on my what I got this week video. Monstrous, what number is this? 30 is out, and he said he was surprised to see it still going.
Because the Portuguese publishers nowadays, they don't commit to long-running series because in Portugal they will fizzle out. So what the biggest U.S. publisher of U.S. Comics is doing is that if the series is like 30 issues but complete, they'll release 2 15-issue volumes. They will be crazy expensive, but at least we know that we'll read everything.
Gotcha.
And that was interesting because I can remember Eric Larson. People every now and then somebody tweets him, "Are you going to put out all of the Savage Dragon in hardcovers?" Because a lot of the Image stuff comes out in hardcovers, and he always says no because it won't make any money. He always says, "I know exactly how it'll go. The first 3 volumes will sell fine, but by the time I get to volume 6, it'll be losing money." And there's 25 volumes of Savage Dragon, or something like some absurd. It's just past issue 251 just came out. Right. So it's like there's no way I can put them all out, and I understand that. I mean, because it's volumes 1, 2, and 3 of everything sell better than volumes 4, 5, and 6. It's just the way it works.
Same thing in home video releases too. You'll see that a lot.
Right. So it's better to, I think, for the Portuguese publishers, I think got it right. It's better to put out 2 big, 15-issue volumes than 6 5-issue volumes. You'll probably sell them better. I don't know.
They've been doing that with a few series, but mostly because they want to have a library of comics with series that have been adapted into TV. So they're counting on the TV connection to get to an audience that would normally not buy comics. But I'm not sure how much it works. But for other stuff, they try to get even some Marvel stuff. They try to get Marvel series who had the Netflix series, and for Iron Fist they combine two volumes into one.
Okay,
gotcha.
And it's also interesting about speaking of Monstrous, but by the way, another good issue. It's on issue 30, and I'm still reading it, so I obviously like it. So sometimes it's like you run out of nice things to say about a comic, but it's like I'm on issue 30 and still reading it. What more can you say? But it just said at the end here, and I'm not sure what the publishing schedule. I don't really pay that much attention to the publishing schedule on this Image stuff because most of them take a break and then come back. And I just have it on my pull list, so I don't have to worry about it. So it's like, Monstrous disappears for a few months and then is back. And I'm fine with that. I don't really pay that close of attention. But on this one, it says Monstrous Volume 5 will be coming out. But it also says that they're coming back earlier than usual because they're doing a 2-issue series. So we're getting a couple of extra issues of Monstrous that kind of look at the past of a couple of characters. So I'm like, I wonder how that will affect the publishing schedule in Portugal when they have just like a 2-issue. Do you just throw those in at the end?
They'll probably wait. I know there are 2 volumes, so
right.
So by now they should have a 3rd one because
right.
I think they were happy with the sales on that one, but here if it sells 1,000, it's a success, and if so, they might as well have it. But I haven't seen a new volume in a while.
So almost a miracle. There's still Portuguese editions.
Yeah. We just because for the last 2 years we finally have a good publisher for French comics, because the regular one who has the rights to all the stuff that sells, they are forced to get if they want to publish Asterix, they have to get the rights to other series, which they don't want. So they'll put out the first volume. It doesn't. Then they'll tell the French publisher, it doesn't sell, because they're not a comic book publisher. They're a regular book publisher, and the comics are kind of a side gig. And what's worse, they got rid of the person who understood comics about 5 or 6 years ago, and she's now with the other publisher.
Ain't that always the way? They at DC they just put a video game guy in charge. It's like.
Yeah, but it's the president. They got rid of the editor because they said, we don't need an editor editing comics. Whatever.
Why would you need that at a comic company?
Right.
Didn't miss tonight's gig. He's on another bender, I see. Yeah, He has something to do. We don't even know. He might show up later, he said. We'll have to see when he gets home.
The only bender Tim's going to be on is B. Bender from Futurama.
But like I said, Monstrous has been especially good since the shooting war started. Before that, there was a lot of politics and adventure, and now there's like a big, there's like World War II going on. So there's all sorts of war drama happening. So that's pretty good. And here's one I completely forgot about. Bang number 3. This is the first issue that's come out since COVID. So I saw this on, like I said, every week. I'm lucky enough. The guy who runs my local comic shop, he actually runs it as a hobby. He's got a full-time job that he telecommutes to, where he writes code for some big credit card company. So he writes a lot of their back end code and stuff for their internal doc. I don't even know what he does. But what he's written for the comic shop is every week I get a couple of emails. I get an email that lists all the stuff that's coming. Like on the weekend, I'll get final order cutoff email where it lists all the stuff that's coming out. Well, not all the indie stuff, but all the Marvel and DC and the main big indie stuff. And I can just click on the link and add it to my pull list, which is really handy.
Right.
Or he also tells you that you get another email on the weekend that tells you what's coming out that week and what's on my pull list, so I know what's coming that week. And Bang was on that list. And I looked at it and went, what the heck is Bang? I don't even remember. But it's Matt Kint writing and Wilfredo Torres drawing. And it's kind of, have you ever read any of Matt Kint's stuff?
Never have.
Department H or Mind Management is really good.
Yeah, I recognize that title, but I've never read it.
Yeah, I actually prefer his stuff when he's drawing it. His style is, his drawing style is very similar to, I finally read one of his books, Jeff Lemire. His stuff, Underwater Welder, which I've never read. Right. And he's got a similar drawing. The two of them, they have a similar drawing style, I've noticed. So it's kind of very it's very cartoony and bold line and very very sort of not labored over, not fussy
It's not over rendered.
Let me go to my. Let me see if I got one. Where do I even? Crap! I put mind management out of. It's either mind management or Department H. They're in crap.
Out of sight, out of mind management.
But their mind management was especially good, and so was mind management was very sort of big world conspiracy, all these different secret agents in it with superpowers. Good. I definitely recommend mind management. Department H was was smaller, but about this underwater science experiment. It was kind of like Alien or The Thing, where it was a horror in a closed space, a constrained space.
So it was like the Sphere, or Deep Star 6, or The Abyss.
Because it took place in this like bottom of the ocean lab.
I've always been a sucker for underwater stories like that.
Yeah, well, this one was good. Like it's either called Depth or Department H, because that's
I see what you mean.
That's a little pun to the name.
That's quite clever.
Yes, but Bang is a little more like mind management, and it's got secret agents in it. And it's got a James Bondian character, and but like the James Bond character gets sort of replaced every few years. It's like what if James Bond every 10 years was replaced by a new James Bond who didn't know there was an old James Bond. And now he's going around trying to figure out this double secret conspiracy that's going on. And it's pretty good. Like I said, I enjoyed this issue. Was all about this one woman who's another double secret special agent who's like this. She's a double secret special agent who's also running her own empire of some kind. And the James Bond character, it's only like a 5-issue mini, I think. The other James Bond character came in to get her help in taking down this big organization. We'll see how that goes. Open that blind a little more. But like I said, another good one. The fact that it was only like a 5-issue mini also made me go, I can read this for 5. I'm a Matt Kindt fan in general, but I do prefer it when he draws his own stuff. Let's see, what else did we get this week? The new issue. The new issue of Bitterroot, which was a little confusing to me because as issue 10, I only started with issue 8. And it's issue 10 as the end of the story, and a whole bunch of people showed up at the end of the story who I didn't know who they were. I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'll find out who they are eventually.
It's like a party in college. Like, where'd all these people come from?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. When I started issue 8, that's how it goes.
All right.
But I can't complain about the captions in this one because they give them to you. That caption there says North Carolina, and then, Northern Oklahoma, and then they switch to Harlem, and they give you a Harlem caption. I've been complaining in weeks past that books don't give you basic captions. This gives you basic captions. I was like, thankfully, somebody doesn't think it's cool to leave captions out.
They're finally listening to you.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Let's see. Bang, no relation to Wally Wood's Gangbang, I assume? Nope, not.
No.
I haven't read Matt Kindt stuff since Super Spy and Pistol Whip. Yeah. I don't think I've read either of those because I didn't catch on to him until Mind Management. I think that was the first thing I read of his, but I've heard of that other stuff.
Right.
Well, Mind Management's just a lot of fun because he's very creative with the superpowers too. These spies have superpowers, and he's just really creative with them. It's good to see creative superhero stuff. Or super spy stuff, whichever you want to call it.
No, we can't rely on Marvel and DC anymore for decent stuff.
No,
I mean,
I came to that conclusion 20 years ago.
I actually read, though I didn't buy it, borrowed a copy and read the Hulk story, Maestro, the new one.
no.
Yeah.
I actually enjoyed that one, I have to say. I was like, wow. I think it was, I think Peter David wrote that. I know Peter David wrote the original Maestro story from like the late 90s, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I think he's writing this one too with Dale Keown and someone else. And it's like a 5-issue mini, but it was enjoyable. It's
Wait a
one of
minute.
the first
So
Marvel.
yeah. So Peter David is writing the Hulk and Dale Keown is drawing it. What year is this?
Yes, exactly. That's one of the reasons a lot of people were interested in it.
Gotcha.
That's because they were bad. But Dale Keown only drew part of it. Someone else drew another part, who's good too. I can't remember who it was though, because who knows who all these current Marvel artists are? It's like whoever they are, they are.
Yeah, their events are getting stupider every time. I mean, this time the bad guys were defeated by the power of love, literally.
Now, that reminds me.
Sounds like a Care Bears episode.
Yeah, it wasn't Care Bears. It was evil cabbages from outer space.
Evil cabbages from outer space.
Yeah.
There's a movie title there for you.
Yeah, Mr. Gretzky, Tim has gone missing tonight, so we're on my channel for the evening. He might show up later. He might not. We'll see.
We don't know.
He's got plans on Labor Day weekend. Oh, what a big shot.
He's got a wife. And
His wife has plans.
A new wife. He can't just blow off those plans, can he? Then I actually picked up 2 first issues this week. You know, I had some money that was burning my hole in my pocket, so I picked up this terrible cover. We only find them when they're dead. And someone, I think it was Earl Grey, said there was another version of this cover with the logo really small on it, but I didn't see that one at my shop. This is by Al Ewing, and I think it's Simone DeMeo.
Yeah.
Al Ewing is the Hulk guy, right? The Immortal Hulk writer.
Yeah.
And I saw the preview of it, and I wasn't fond of the artwork. It's kind of got this no inking video game style.
Yeah, it's what they do. I think they seem to think that we have to do this because that's what the kids like.
Yeah,
it's the same thing with animation. Have you noticed that the cartoons for 5-year-olds are all 3D nowadays?
Yeah. I think it's easier and cheaper these days to do 3D. And though it read pretty well, though I don't like the artwork just looking at it, it read pretty well. And it's an interesting... With both these comics, I'll get it right out of the way ahead of time. I liked them both, but not enough to buy them. Or issue, not enough to pay $4 an issue or $5 as Lonely Receiver is. But we'll get to that. But it was pretty... It's the story of... takes place in the future. It's sci-fi. And they're at the edge of the galaxy. And, our galaxy is really, really huge. But there's a lot of space between our galaxy and the next closest galaxies, I guess.
Yes.
And at the edge of their galaxy starts floating up. And we haven't crossed the gap between galaxies because it's too big so far. But at the edge of the galaxy that has been floating up are the bodies of gods, or at least they call them gods. They're these giant bodies. And human beings are mining these bodies for their elements. And this is the story. And this first issue, like I said, it was pretty well done and pretty well written. It was almost a procedural, where it was all about the procedure of mining these bodies. And what happens is a new kind of body floats to the edge of our galaxy, and then like the government or whoever, you have to stake your it's like an old-fashioned land rush. You have to stake your claim, and there's conflict between the big corporations and the small independent land rush guys, all trying to stake out the best claim to mine these bodies of the gods. And all that stuff was going on in the first. Like I said, it was almost a procedural.
Interesting.
So, it was. If I happen to see the second issue and it's like, but I don't know. It's kind of like the artwork put me off. Like I said, both of these I enjoyed them, but I don't know if I enjoyed them enough to pay $4 a month for them. And it's kind of like it's a weird thing,
right?
But and it ends up with
we like to wait for the trade paperback and then buy it for half price.
Yeah, but that usually means I never buy the trade paperback because I never see. It's kind of like, then I'd have to remember and look it up. Whenever I say maybe I'll pick that up in trade, that probably means I'll never read it, because when am I ever going to see we only find them when they're dead trade paperback? I'd have to go looking for it. Maybe if it catches my eye sometime in the future,
I'll just have to change the name of the title. We'll only find them when we're looking.
Yeah. But at the end of this, the one captain of the ship, who is the protagonist of the story, decides he wants to go out and find a living god. So I think I don't know how they're going to pull that off if there's just like nothing but dead space in between here and there. Walter Simon drew the covers for Hulk 364 to 368. Okay.
You did.
I don't remember. I haven't seen those in a long time. Al Ewing book sounds interesting, but it also sounds some old stuff by Ben Nova or someone. Yeah. I haven't read sci-fi in such a long time. I don't remember. Like my friend Rob, who I usually go to the comic store with, but haven't since COVID. He always tells me what old sci-fi book something was based on.
Yeah. Yeah, if you do enough digging, you'll find an analog to some kind of a concept somewhere.
Right. And then the last thing I got this week, which annoyed me because I forgot about, was Lonely Receiver by Aftershock. And I had forgotten that Aftershock has started putting out $5 first issues.
They should change your name from Aftershock to Sticker Shock.
Yeah. Well, and I was just like, that just annoys me. I think the rest of the series is $4 issues. But if I wasn't ready to pay $4, I'm certainly not ready to pay $5. And I'd forgotten that when I was looking for something to buy, and I ended up picking up this one because I kind of liked the art. It's kind of this funky, multicolored, non-computer art. I mean, it's just, but the story, and I knew nothing about the story. Picking it up. And both of these, though neither of them had my favorite art, the storytelling in both of them was good. There was nothing, storytelling was fine.
Right.
But look, it was only after I read Lonely Receiver and then I read the concept for it that I understood the concept, because it is so strange. The concept is phones are so advanced that their AI can become basically your sex robot or just your companion robot. So this woman has, and it starts with someone walking out on her. And it's like, I'm gonna read this a second time to figure out if that was a person or not. And then we get her getting a new phone, and we can see that the phone's AI becomes real and becomes her lover. Her phone's AI is real and made to specifically love her. But then after like 10 years, it walks out on her. So the story is really strange.
Yeah, this one also reminds me of a science fiction novel, but taken to a strange extreme. Because in the Peter F. Hamilton's books, their cell phones, their emails, their agendas, they're in their tattoos, and they're called e-butlers, and they can do everything, and they're also semi-smart. But well, they don't become your lover. Although you can talk to other people inside the AI of the e-butler.
Yeah, they built an actual body for the phone.
What would be the point?
So you don't have to find a girlfriend. That's the point, I'm guessing.
I'm thinking if you can manipulate matter at that level, you can do pretty much anything.
So I was thinking that, this was her girlfriend walking out on her. So then she got the phone girlfriend that couldn't walk out on her. But 10 years later, the phone girlfriend somehow walks out on her. But it was just like, it was interesting. I enjoyed it, but I was annoyed. $5 comic, and I thought I was only spending $4. But like I said, who did this one? This one's by Zach Thompson, Jen Hickman, and Simon Boland. But like I said, I liked both of them, but I don't know I liked both of them enough to pay $4 an issue for both of them.
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean. There's like years and years ago when I was buying Bone when it came out. I love Bone. It's a great series. But one of the things I noticed was like one of the issues only took me like about 10 minutes to read.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, so I spent $2.99 or whatever the price was, $2.99 probably at that point.
$3 back then.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes you're like, what about Something Is Killing These Damn Kids? I think I digitally read the first couple issues of that and then paid no attention to it. I mean, I remember thinking they were okay, but I don't think I never went back to it. Sometimes I do that. I'll read something digitally, and if I really like it, I'll then go and get it physically. But with that one, I didn't get. Or sometimes I'll just continue read. Like right now, I'm reading Ice Cream Man on Hoopla digital, and I think the first 3 or 4 volumes they have out on Hoopla, which is the library app around here.
Right.
So you can borrow stuff from the library digitally.
It's a good way to sample.
And I really liked the Ice Cream Man. I think I'm gonna start buying that one physically. Yeah, that could. Now that you mention it, We Only Find Them When They're Dead does sound a bit like a Celestial story that he thought was too good to give to Marvel, because they're giant space gods floating out in space.
The problem is that Celestials usually show up on Earth, and the Avengers are currently living inside one, so it didn't sound that original for the Marvel Universe.
Well, I've not liked the Celestials post Jack Kirby original Eternals book, only because the Celestials were supposed to be these unknowable space gods, but now they're just like another character, another level of power in the Marvel Universe. So they're kind of like, I liked them better when they were.
It was on the DeFalco Friends store.
Right. You were not supposed to be able to do anything to Celestials. They were just kind of this unknowable space god out there, because they weren't supposed to be in the Marvel Universe. But once they're in the Marvel Universe, they're no longer unknowable space gods. They're just, the Beyonder or whoever else.
I think some stories that if you tell too much about the origin of something, it loses the mystique.
Yeah.
That's what happened with Alien and Prometheus.
Yeah, they've already had conversations with the Celestials, and that defeats the whole point.
Yep. I think I'd rather buy some food with that $5 than. Can you get that upgrade
for the phone AI?
I don't think I can. Ginseng roots went up to $6 an issue. I don't know that one, but that's expensive. It all depends on what it is, too. If it's something that's really worth it, I mean, there's some, like, I'm an indie comic buyer from way back. So it was like in the 80s, I was paying $1.50 an issue for whatever when Marvel comics were 75 cents. And all the Marvel Comics fans would be going, "You're paying $1.50 for that, and it doesn't even have color?" And I'm like, "Hey, this is the one I want to read."
All right.
So for some stuff, it's worth it, but everything is so expensive. Not like I said. There's really a problem when Marvel and DC are now more expensive than the indie comics. So some things are worth it, some things are not.
Wouldn't it be funny if, like, a lot of the indie titles that had food items in the titles would have a pricing war, like you had a sale at a grocery store? Flaming carrot, $1. It's only $1. This week.
A special on flaming carrots.
Exactly. Yeah.
I used to buy that one. Flaming Carrot comics.
Yeah.
Hoot.
Yeah, there was a time when I was interested in trying milk and cheese, but getting an issue was impossible here.
Milk and cheese is really funny at times, but you have to have a really dark sense of humor to appreciate it.
I've only read Milk and Cheese when it's been in
Dark Horse Presents.
Various, like Dark Horse Presents or something. Right. I've never bought a Milk and Cheese issue, I don't think. But speaking of Evan Dorkin, his that comic book club one he does,
Eltingville.
Yes, Eltingville, Sci-Fi.
I have a hardcover like 20 feet away from me right now.
Read my hardcovers back there too. I enjoy. Well, I found the best way to read that is as if it was a Sunday comic strip.
I can see that.
I'd read because it's so dense and so full of stuff. I'd read like 1 or 2 pages a day. This is like after I read it. Sometimes I found when I read the whole, it can get tedious because it's so dense.
I can see that.
But if I read 1 or 2 pages a day, I love it and can really appreciate it. Because it's not about the plot. It's about anything that's going on in that individual panel. And it's so dense that it's like that sometimes it tires you out if you try to read the whole thing at once. So I'm like, I really, really liked it a lot more when I was reading 1 and 2 pages a day. Not that I didn't like it the first time, but I liked it even more.
Some stories just work better that way.
Yeah, they do. That's what I always tell people when, like, he just changed his name, Masked Panther, to Black Manta. He's a small YouTube channel that, like, Sleepy Reader and I are the only ones who watch. And he's probably started 5 years ago when he was in his early 20s, and he started getting. He's really a big fan of the old 60s stuff. Young guy, but he likes the old 60s Marvel. And he was like, "Oh man, but one time he was like, I'm having trouble reading this Masterworks," and I was like, "Read 1 issue and put it down, because those weren't meant to read 6 issues in a row. It's not a current comic. Read 1 issue, put it down, come back the next day, read another issue. You'll enjoy it a lot more."
A few years ago, I missed out on buying the complete Too Much Coffee Man. Because they brought Shannon Wheeler to Portugal because we had an exhibit on his New Yorker cartoons.
Oh, nice.
So he was a guest.
Cool. Let's see. Did you ever read Razorback in the 90s? I don't recognize that one.
Is he talking about the
one that was
there's an independent title called Razors, written by a guy named Everett Hartsoe?
I don't know that one at all.
And it was porn. It was soft porn, wasn't it?
It was kind of, if it's the one I'm thinking of, is very violent, kind of stereotypical bad girl,
the stuff that
semi-assassin kind of thing.
The stuff that the guys on Cartoonist Kayfabe outlaw comics.
I guess I don't know.
That's what they call all that stuff from the 80s and 90s. That was drawn usually by one guy in his garage. Not the big time stuff.
Well,
but sort of the black and white, extra violent or whatever, extra whatever stuff.
Yeah, a lot of that stemmed from Tim Vigil's work on Faust.
Yeah, there is that. Bob Burden and Evan Dorkin were our Flaming Carrot and Eltingville and Milk and Cheese guy. Yeah, Eltingville. There we go. I really want to leave. Palookaville is one of my absolute favorites. I read It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken at least once a year. Let me show you.
That's a good title.
Yeah. But I will tell you something about this up front. I will spoil it slightly. It's not really a spoiler. But this book upset some people when they find out that, because a lot of this is autobiographical. It's Seth is his main character.
Right.
And I actually prefer the issues because they're bigger than this small one. But what he's doing in this is it's all about him and his everyday life. But he's also becomes obsessed with this New Yorker cartoonist who only did a few cartoons way back in the day.
Right.
He made up the New Yorker cartoonist. You know, he's not that. You don't get that reading the book, but you find it. But that actually upset some people to find out that the New Yorker cartoonist he was hunting down is
a fictional character. Right.
So I want to let people know that so they're not upset. It doesn't ruin the book for them, because that actually ruined the book for some people. And I can kind of understand it. And this all came out. This was published first in Palookaville.
Gotcha.
Like issues 4 through, I don't know, 16 or something.
Yeah, Charles Vess is a big fan of Seth's work.
He's one of my absolute favorites. I love Clyde fans. This, like I said, this is just about him living his life, kind of, and it's a good life if you don't weaken, kind of thing. But I just love his cartooning. He really makes me feel something, even with his like static drawings. I just think his line is beautiful. I just think he's got a lot of expression to his drawing, even though it's drawing that's really down to its, he tries to get it as simple as possible, but there's still a lot of expression.
Is his drawing style kind of like Jason Lutz's style?
Jason Lutz is more illustrative.
Okay.
He's got more I would say Jason Lutz is more 3-dimensional. Seth is more 2-dimensional designy.
Okay.
So, yeah. Like I said, one of my absolute favorites. They put out Palookaville now in these weird volumes. Hold on. This is Palookaville 23. It's a little hardcover.
It's square?
It's not quite square, but it's small. It's like 8 by 5.
Gotcha.
And it's got it's got like Clyde fan. Well, this has got a new one in it. This has got Nothing Lasts Part 3, and it's about $20, $23. But they come out once every 2 or 3 years. It's not like he just does a whole page of faces. When he was doing Clyde fans, he built the little town that Clyde fans came in out of. I think this is Clyde fans Part 5. This was the end of. You can now get Clyde fans in its own in its own thick volume, still about this size. He built a little town that Clyde fans out of foam core board and paint. Yeah. And there was an exhibition of it near him. There's in one of the Palookavilles, they have a whole section on the town he built. He also did a couple this is one of my favorites. Wimbledon Green. And this is just a little story he did. I think he said this is one of his sketchbook stories. So he didn't labor over it like he did the other ones. So he doesn't think it's as good. All the little drawings. But this is like a world where people collect comic books like they were fine art. And Wimbledon Green is the world's greatest comic book collector. So he flies around on his jet looking for obscure comic books. And it's just
that's
a wonderful
the way life should be, huh?
Yeah, it's just a wonderful
gotcha.
A wonderful book.
International Comic Collector of Mystery.
Let's see what bought a Random Predator trade 1 years ago and Evan Dorkin art in it. Yeah, he was
interesting.
He was he had a pretty good run of stuff in the 90s. He was doing Bill and Ted for Marvel. That was nice.
He also worked on Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Right. So he had a good run, but then Razor was on the way to Faust. Okay.
Yeah, I know the guy that actually did the Razor comic book.
Razor was trying to ape the gothic grimness of the Crow. It was Goth Kid bait. Okay.
It was not aimed at little kids, though. It was really, really violent.
Lots of Golden Age reading recently, man, and some old. We're going to be talking about a 1950. Did you read Space Detective #1, Paolo? Did you get a chance?
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, we were talking because we decided that I just found some old comic and digitally some scan, and we were all going to read it and talk about it. The 90s actually had a robust, independent, and small press presence. Yeah, it did. There's some good stuff.
I could talk your off all day long about indie titles from back in the 80s and 90s, man.
Oh, yeah. The Fall is one of my favorite Jason Lutz things.
I haven't read that. I've only read Berlin.
It originally appeared. It's only a short piece. It originally appeared in Dark Horse Presents.
That I may have it then.
I think Ed Brubaker wrote it. It was Brubaker and Lutz.
Yeah, I may have that. It's possible.
And it was before Brubaker was,
a big
Brubaker
name
was a guy.
Gotcha.
And it's just, and then I think they printed it like years later in like a magazine size comic. That was real. That's one of my favorites. The Fall.
Gotcha.
Seth Arkworth, he definitely was influenced by a lot of that. And you can, you can see that in It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken. He really, Lutz. Yeah, the large size version. That's a great version. If you can find that one, go with that one rather than just because it's nicer. It's all in one volume. It's like it's stapled too. It's saddle stitched. It's not a trade, but it's like I think it's about magazine size. It's bigger than a regular comic. But look up Brubaker and Lutz, The Fall, and it's about I'm trying to remember it now. It's about a guy who finds a dead body. And just how it affects him in his brain, and it's just weird. I'm reading Artesia, going through the second volume. I don't know that one.
It's a fantasy series.
Okay.
Mark Smalley's got a really interesting art style. He doesn't look like anybody else.
Of the Fall. And I figured another thing. I since I get these comic shop news, I should bring them out.
Yeah.
Just because there's some stuff. They're revamping Shang-Chi. I have not been interested in Shang-Chi since Jean Day died. Have you guys read any Shang-Chi ever?
I never have.
Yeah.
No.
Shang-Chi was a regular feature in two of the Brazilian Marvel comics that I used to buy, and the first stories I read were already drawn by Mike Zeck. So
okay,
but they were pretty good because I was getting Mike Zeck in double dose. Because not all the continuity wasn't aligned. I was getting Captain America and Master of Kung Fu with Mike Zeck at the same time.
You're talking about Jean Day. I have a graphic novel that's called Future Day, which has a lot of Jean Day stories in it. And a lot of those were earlier science fiction stories that were published in some of the Warren magazines.
Okay.
And I remember seeing those as a kid, and I liked them because they were, very heavily influenced by Star Wars. They're fighter pilots in space kind of thing. And I remember looking at this, I'm like, that lettering in this story looks awfully familiar. I didn't recognize it back then, but I'm like looking at it these days, like, this lettering is somebody, and it turns out it was Dave Sim that was doing the lettering.
Huh.
Yeah.
Wow. Couple of Canadians. Yeah, to me the good Master of Kung Fu stuff was from the 70s. Was Starlin drew some of it, Galassi drew some of it.
Yeah, Galassi.
Mike Zeck and Jean Day.
Yeah.
What was that?
Starlin drew the first two. Galassi becomes the regular. Every once in a while, there was a Lee Elias fill-in or something. Then Mike Zeck becomes the regular in the late 70s, early 80s. Late 70s, because in the early 80s, it's only Jean Day now. And the comic ends in 83. No, 83. Day dies in 83, right? And then the comic was kind of loses steam, and they cancel it very quickly. Because that's one of the things they said that Jim Shooter wanted to turn the comic into a ninja comic.
After Jean Day, You know what's weird? I was just looking at because I haven't looked at those. I was talking with someone, I can't remember where, about Master of Kung Fu and Gene Day, and I thought I dropped it right after Gene Day died, but it turned out I had a few issues after he died, and I even went back and bought the last issue, which was 125, and I didn't realize like those issues. I forget who the penciler was, but they were inked by Mike Mignola. So it's like those last issues. Yeah, last issues of Volume 1 were inked by Mike Mignola. I'm like, oh, wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, I remember reading a interview with Mike Mignola about how he started out as an inker at Marvel, and he's always afraid they were going to fire him because he wasn't that good at the time.
The Gene Day stuff, some of the nicest covers and splash pages come out of that Gene Day era. He was really working hard.
Yeah. I never got that much of a chance to see Gene Day covers because when he was appearing in Super Aventuras, they usually did Daredevil or X-Men covers, which were the other titles, the other features in the title. So, but I do remember one with the one with Razor Fist.
I always liked that.
Yeah, that was amazing.
With like just all Razor Fist written. I came on. That one always stuck with me too. That was a good one, and it's so simple too. It wasn't even like one of his more complex ones. It just worked. But I'll have to see. I may have all the covers in one file. I do that sometimes when I'm bored. I find digital copies of a bunch of old comics. And put the covers all in one like file, so I can just on my iPad I can just flip through the covers if I want.
Right.
Like I've got like some of the I've got like all the Wonder Woman covers for some reason in a file, just because I did that one evening as I was sitting there doing nothing. I've got some like Golden Age science fiction covers all in one file.
I love those.
I'll have to pass the files on to you, just like I passed the Space Detective on.
Do you ever do that? Do you ever do that on Pinterest, where you like go down a rabbit hole looking at a certain subject or whatever, and like 4 hours go by? You know?
I don't like Pinterest because it's so low resolution.
It used to be
every time I go to find a picture on Pinterest, I'm like, oh my god, let me find a good version of the picture because this is low resolution.
Gotcha.
Oh, and I think this is the Fall is just under DC Black Label size, the one. Okay. Nartesia was published by Sirius Comics, I think.
Yeah.
I used to get I got something from I can't remember. I don't have to look up that.
They also did a Kiko as well.
Side note, this has been one of my favorite streams in a long time. Paolo was great. Scott, while hidden, has a deep info too. All righty. Glad you're liking the show. Artesia is indeed by Sirius, at least initially.
Right.
And Dave Sim loved Gene Day. Yeah.
I think,
well, I think they're both Canadians too.
I also think that Dave worked in Gene Day's studio for a while.
I used to. There was a time when I was just looking up stuff randomly on the Grand Comics database. And I was looking at the things that Bill Black used to publish before AC Comics. And there's a lot of stuff with Dave Sim and Gene Day and Gene Day's brother in there.
Right.
Oh, interesting. Dan Day? That's the name?
Yeah, and Rick Levins too.
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Low fantasy, high and well, that's Artesia. Pretty good, actually. Those characters look like twins. And the early deaths of Gene Day and Don. Yeah, I can still remember there was an article in the Comics Journal talking about clickbait headlines before there was clickbait. That said like Jim Shooter did not kill Gene Day because Gene Day apparently used to come down on the train from Canada to New York in order to meet deadlines and like stay at the Marvel offices and work all day and night at the Marvel offices to meet the deadline. And I think his and some people blamed Jim Shooter for his early death because Gene Day worked so hard for Jim Shooter. But other people were, the people who know him were like, well, his lifestyle wasn't too healthy. He'd drink like, liters of soda to keep himself awake. And he was, never exercised and didn't eat right. So that's why he ended up, I think, having a stroke or a heart attack or something so young. He was like 36 or 38 or something like that.
Ouch.
He was, I remember when that happened because, like I said, I was collecting Master of Kung Fu. So I was in high school probably, collecting Master of Kung Fu off the stands, loving Gene Day. He was one of my absolute favorites. And then for him, and then he just died, and they, of course, they memorialized him in a letters page. And this is the days before the internet, so you don't hear Gene Day died until you get that issue or something that says, "Oh, Gene Day died," and you're like, "Whoa!"
Yeah. I remember when Seth Fisher died too. I was like, "Man, he's just way too young." Yeah.
That's where I first heard of Seth Fisher. That was the strange thing too. I was like, "Oh my!" It's like there's Oh, her name just flew out of my head. There's a singer. She's British. She wrote the theme to the Tracy Ullman show, amongst other things. But she died in a boating accident in like the 90s, and then her last album was released posthumously. And it's like I discovered her with that last album. And I'm like, oh,
right,
oh,
yeah.
Her name will come to me in a second when I'm trying to, but she's matter of fact, she is the female lead on the Pogues' Fairy Tale of New York. I don't
know.
That's probably her most famous song because it's the Pogues, but it's not Christine Lavin. I know that. That's the name that keeps coming. Christine Lavin is American, not English, but it was the same thing. It's like you find out with Seth Fisher, it made the news that he died, and I was like, who's he? I never even heard of him before. And I went and looked up his work and actually got some of his Green Lantern work, and it was really nice.
Yeah, I actually met the guy because he was my LCS's owner managed to convince the Amadora Festival guy to bring the guy over from Japan because he lived in Japan.
Right.
He had a custom-made X-Men jacket from the Grant Morrison era.
And that has the name Christy McCall. That's what I'm trying to think of. I discovered Christy McCall like 3 months after she died. On her album, it's just and it's something a little sad about that. You're like, oh.
Right.
Yeah, Seth Fisher was pretty cool. He would talk about anything and very easygoing. We went out to dinner, and then this Brazilian guy tried to hit on him with his tongue.
Okay.
Wow, so you even got to go out to dinner and chat with him. Wow, that must have been. Yeah. And he like fell off a roof too, right?
Yeah, he used to play that game where you jumped from one roof to the other.
Yeah, one of his hobbies.
Was that what he was doing?
Yeah, he was climbing. He liked to climb buildings, and
jeez,
he fell.
Yeah, you kind of don't expect a guy in his late 30s to do that, especially when you have a kid.
Yeah. I thought he drunkenly fell off the roof at a party.
No.
I wasn't sure if that was it or not.
No. That makes it even more sad, that it was.
Yeah, that he was doing. Yeah. Those were the ones that Frank Quitely drew.
Yeah.
They were pretty neat. Also appeared on the album. That's Christy McCall. Okay, yeah, she appeared in a bunch of stuff. She was much more famous in England than she was over here in the States. Edwin, I don't know him. Edwin.
I know the name, but I can't.
Yeah, he
place
worked
what he's
on
done.
some of the. He was Croatian. He usually worked with Darko Makan, and but he also had some stuff published on the X-Men titles, and then he just died suddenly, and he was he was 39, I think.
Wow. Sudden death. Well, let's see what else is coming out besides because this is actually good. This is actually a good one because it gives you a look at everything a little look at everything that's coming out. Like it says, what's coming out here. The Last Ronin, which is I didn't know about. This is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles one.
Yeah.
The Last Ronin, which just changed. Any Turtles fans? I mean, I'm not a Turtles fan. I'm a little old for them.
Nah.
But they just I find it interesting that they passed out a preview edition of it. This at some con somewhere, and it was supposed to ship in mid-August. But I guess I don't know what happened. But that artist isn't doing it anymore, and they had to get a whole new artistic team, and now it's being released in October. So it's like the preview editions are now collector's items because that artist isn't doing them anymore.
Gotcha.
But the scary part is it's from IDW, and I don't know if this is a placeholder or the real price, but it's got an $8.99 price. And this is on issue 2. I'm just like $8.99? $9 an issue?
Does it have a page count?
It does not have a page count.
Okay.
But still, I'm just like, because reading this actually got me The Last Ronin, and it's about, I think it takes place in the future, and there's only one turtle left alive, and you don't know which one it is. That's why it's called The Last Ronin, and it's about his life, and I don't know if it's about his death or not, but that actually sounds like an interesting concept. And I think one of them, Eastman or Laird, is writing it. Eastman and Laird are both writing it.
Kind of like sounds like Old Man Logan in the
Old Man Logan in the Turtles,
right?
And it actually got me interested in the Turtles for a moment until I saw that price tag, and I went, no, not gonna happen.
My very first exposure to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was seeing their graphics that were printed on some guitars that Anthrax was playing back in the 80s. Yeah, I remember seeing an Anthrax video, and I was looking like, "What the hell are the graphics on?" And like, did a little research, like, "Oh, okay,
the Turtles."
Yep, the Turtles.
When I was a kid, I didn't even know there was a comic because the first movie came out, and that's when they started broadcasting the cartoon in Europe.
Right.
And so there was a Turtle Mania. All of a sudden, we had the toys. There was stickers, and they put out the Turtles comic with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle Adventures, which was published by Archie.
Right. I would have to say the vast majority of Turtles fans had no idea it was comic.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mentioned when I did a video on the Xenozoid Tales. There's a bunch of the Xenozoid Tales. It was another thing that I didn't know was a comic because I first saw it as Cadillacs and Dinosaurs when it was a cartoon.
Oh,
right. And it's like it was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, and Fish Police, which I also didn't know was a comic. Because I had no idea the indie comics they don't get licensed to other countries like the regular Marvel DC stuff. Even
there's no corporate structure to grease the wheels. So.
Yeah. So unless you have an editor who does indie comics in another country and is familiarized enough with certain material, and he has to go look for stuff on purpose just because he likes to know that. Otherwise, you'll never know.
And then it looks like they're coming out with a gallery edition of Daredevil Love and War. Mm-hmm. So it says here, this is the Frank Miller and Sienkiewicz one, and it's the same. It's going to be presented the same size as the original art. So it's going to be 11 by 17 book.
Okay, so it's like an artist edition.
Yeah, so it's like an artist edition. But I don't know. Marvel's been doing them not that they look like the original art, but from the printed art. So I don't think it's gonna look like, but it's painted, so it'll look like the original art no matter what, pretty much. And then they've also got Ditko is Strange king size, which is. Have you seen the giant books Marvel's been putting out? They're like 24 by 16.
I love those, even though some of them may not be subjects or characters I'm interested in. Sometimes I just like the concept of a book that big.
Right. So this is the Ditko Doctor Strange printed at 15 by 21.
Right.
That's pretty cool. And they're also printing all of the Eternals at 15 by 21. All of Jack Kirby's Eternals.
Gotcha.
So that's got to be expensive. $125. Yeah, stunts. So that was what 2021.
They're pricey. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I see Darwin Cook on that page?
Yep, we've got Richard Stark's Parker Martini edition.
Gotcha.
They're coming out with a. Hold on, let me show you this.
Another guy that died before he should have.
Especially because I really love those Parker comics. They had the neatest trick I've ever seen in a comic book. Because there's I think that's a chapter in the book which is exposition on how the outfit operates, explaining how all the, and he does that chapter as sort of a mini comic guide for people who need to learn that thing, and in a cute little style, and it's just amazing.
This is the only Parker book I have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and the only reason this is the only Parker book I have is because what year did this come out? And I also, my friend Bunch also got it autographed for me, and he had Darwin Cook. And he had Darwin Cook spell my name wrong. Whoops. He had Darwin Cook spell my name wrong on purpose. So it's sort of an inside joke going on in the signature. He's friends. He was friends with Darwin Cook. So, and this came out in 2009. Mm-hmm. In 2009, I was buying mostly collected editions.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Because there just weren't that many comics that I liked coming out. So I was buying a lot of collected editions, and there were a lot of collected editions coming out. So I bought The Hunter, and then I don't know what the second one to come out was, but before I got the second one, they announced the oversized Martini edition of the first volume and the second volume together. And I was like, why didn't they sell that first? It's like, I want that volume.
Yeah.
And so I ended up, then they came out with that volume and announced a third one. So I ended up kind of frozen, not knowing which volume I wanted.
Yeah. Well, that's happened to me a couple times too.
And so I only ended up with the first one and I never bought another one, even though I like them and want to buy them all. Matter of fact, once the Martini edition comes out, I bet the smaller editions go down in price. Like as much as I want the bigger edition, maybe I can get because like the Martini edition was cheaper than buying the two smaller editions.
Right.
It was just kind of like, that's when publishers make you feel like a fool for buying their book. So you don't want to buy their book. So that's kind of like, yeah. So that's what happened with me, Parker. Yeah. I want them, but I haven't got them.
See, I'm of the opinion that Darwin Cook could do no wrong.
Yeah. You know what's weird with me and Darwin Cook's work? He's one of those guys. Comic book artists are sometimes like this. Like when I flip through their work and look at it, I don't like it. But when I read it, I love it. Darwin Cook's one of those guys for me. I flip through his work and it doesn't do anything for me. Just looking at it, I'm like, yeah, I don't really like his style. I don't think it's that good. But then when I actually read it, I love it.
Gotcha.
And there are a few artists that are like, and it's just a weird thing about comics because reading their art is the most important thing.
Yeah, I remember when a friend of mine told me, said, you should read Hellboy. I'm like, okay. And at first it didn't really do much for me. And then after about reading, like 7 or 8 issues of it, I'm like, this is genius.
Some of it has to. I was that way when I first started reading Savage Dragon. Because, like I said, my friend Chris Geruso was a big fan of it, and I read an issue here or there, and it didn't really grab me. Then I finally, around issue 70, said, you know what? I'm just going to start reading it and see if it grabs me eventually, and it did. Right. After a few issues, I was like, wow, I'm enjoying this.
The thing about Savage Dragon is there's never a good jumping on point but it doesn't really matter because every issue is all-out action. They don't have breathers. Eric Larson just, okay, this month I'm going to blow up the Earth again. And next month, Savage Dragon is going to have sex with 2 heroines. And the other month is going back to the past.
Now, I hope in that case the word heroin has an E on the end.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, here's another guy. George Caragone, writer for Star Comics and editor of Penthouse Comics, jumped. Yeah, he actually jumped in the middle of a building because I think it was a mall building that had like inside the building was like you could look down into the center of the building, and he jumped off there. I forget what building it was. Yeah, he used to in the early '90s before he got that Penthouse gig. He was up at Marvel a bit.
Gotcha.
But when he got that Penthouse gig, there was tons of money and drugs floating around the Penthouse office. It was a constant party. And I think he got caught up in that too. And then when it all went to hell, he committed suicide. It was not pretty. That's how Dan Spitz has the TNT guitars. Yeah. Usually when a book's 89, it's 100 pages. It says Steve Mancuso, artist, creator of Fit. I remember him.
Yeah.
Who owns the Elementers and other Kimiko characters? I think that's one of those things that's in limbo. Who owns Elementals? Or there's like some guy in Canada who bought them and isn't a comic book fan or anything. He just buys things.
Yeah,
and I think he owns a lot of
interesting characters. The interesting characters are with the creators. So it's Matt Wagner got Mage and Grendel back, and but they managed to retain Elementals.
Because he sold, what's his name? Sold the Elementals specifically. Willingham,
yeah. So they did all those Elemental sex specials just to hold on to the trademark, but then they kind of fizzled out because it was after the market crash.
And that was the last thing that Billy Willingham did for them. And but it wasn't supposed to be a sex special. That's what they turned it into. The ones who bought the Bill Willingham had already sold them by then. Yeah, Fish Police and Salmon Mash were small press comics that were surprisingly made in cartoon. Yeah, in the like early '90s, things were getting turned into cartoons that you'd never expect.
I saw the Wildcats cartoon.
I got turned on to the Tick well before it was ever animated, and I remember reading the book and loving it. It's like, I'm not sure making this into an animated series is going to work, but they did a really good job with it.
Right. TMNT is 48 pages. Well, let's hope that it's bigger on that next one. Oh, that's right, Bob. I am friends with Bob Wyachek, and I just saw his GoFundMe because I actually haven't seen him much during COVID, which I think has to do with his eyes too. He's been. I actually I do a lot of stuff for Bob in terms of he's not a computer guy. He's a friend of mine for years. He lives right near me. He lives like 5 or 10 minutes away from me, one town over. And being that the next town is 3 houses down, it's really close by. But it's like I print out stuff in Blue Line for him to ink over it when he needs it. And over the last few years, he's just been saying to me, this needs to be darker. This needs to be darker. This needs to be darker. And I'm like, Bob, this is as dark as Blue Line gets. So finally, like this winter, I'm like, Bob, you have to go get your eyes checked out. There's something wrong.
Yeah.
Because I could tell the stuff I used to print out for him that was fine now wasn't fine. And he'd be taking off his glasses and looking at it real close. And I'd be like, Bob. So finally, once COVID hit, it took him like a couple of months to find an eye doctor, because none of them were taking new patients. And he eventually found out he has glaucoma.
Right.
So he can't see to ink or make artwork right now. So his son Ian set up a GoFundMe for him so he can make a little money, because he hasn't been able to make any money, and he's got to pay the taxes on the houses. The taxes on the houses are really expensive around here.
I'll tell you something that may be able to help in that regard, because this actually worked for when Gahan Wilson set up a GoFundMe when he was having medical problems. Mm-hmm. If you know somebody that knows Neil Gaiman and can get him to tweet about it, that will immediately get millions of eyes on it, and you'll start getting donations.
We'll have to. He's had other, Of course, he's a big name in comics. He's a name in comics. Everybody in comics knows him, but no. Right. But yeah, we'll have to see if we can get Neil Gaiman to retweet, because I've seen other cartoonists retweet.
Yeah, if you can get Neil to comment on it,
you're right. Neil Gaiman is the guy.
There are a lot of eyes that will see it for that.
Yeah, but it says he's getting treatment for it, but I think he might need surgery or something. But
gotcha.
We'll have to see, but yeah, I actually haven't heard much from him in a while. And I think he went off social media because he can't see the screen anymore. Right. So it's like, ooh.
Yeah, I just saw that it was last night or this morning, something.
Right.
Like that. Yeah.
So go look up Bob's GoFundMe and throw him a couple of bucks because he needs it. Parker's last two volumes. Yeah, and they're putting the last two volumes in the new edition. Yay, money and drugs. Yep, that's what stopped. Because there was so much. If you've never seen those Penthouse comics from the '90s, go back and look at them. All the top talent was working on them.
Yeah,
and I just
science fiction. The Omni ones are the ones that I got.
Right, and people would come back like. Guys who were working at Marvel at the same time would come up to the offices and go, wow, they're throwing around money and drugs up in that Penthouse office.
And some people were going just for the drugs, right?
I think so. Tommy Bagley.
Okay, let me check Grand Comics database. What do we got here? Number 1.
You bring up Grand Comics database. Sometimes they piss me off because you'll have information about regular issues, but they won't have a listing for like the deluxe hardcover.
Yeah, because you have to put in the data manually also for the reprints.
Yeah.
And they don't go automatically. Okay, issue number 1, art by Adam Hughes, Kevin Nolan, Arthur Sydam, Gary Leach.
Yeah.
Mike Harris and Joe Rubinstein. Horacio Altuna. Whoa. Issue number 2. More. These are continuing. Adam Hughes, Gray Morrow.
Yeah.
Paris Cullens, Arthur Sydam, Kevin Nolan, John Hunter, Milo Manara. All right.
Yeah.
They had people working for him. It was something.
It's a reprint of an Italian story, so they probably bought the right to that one. But even so. More Kevin Maguire, more Gray Morrow, Aspiri. Aspiri is a well-known Spanish artist. I'm not sure if he's well-known how many people heard of him in the United States. More Gary Leach, more Kevin Nolan. Let's go up to number 24. Scott Hampton, Masamune Shiro, Hiroyuki Utatame.
Has Shiro done much of anything in the past few years?
Not. From what I heard, he signs it and his assistants do all the work.
So he's Jim Davis now. Okay.
But I think Shiro earned it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. A lot of those Japanese guys have whole studios working for them.
Right.
It's more about.
You guys want to look at a little Space Detective?
Sure.
Yeah.
Let's look at a little Space Detective
before you do that. Let me go off on the small tangent because you're talking about the Penthouse comics, and I had a lot of well-known creators on that. Do you remember a series of magazines? There's about 7 or 8 issues of them called Frank Frazetta Fantasy Illustrated.
Yeah, I heard of it.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. I think it lasted about 7 or 8 issues or so, and it had a lot of top-name comics guys on that.
Okay.
I remember the art director was at Heroes Con one year, and he's asking people, like, what artists would you like to see in this magazine? And I spat out some of the like Kaluta and Wrightson. And then I mentioned Craig Russell, and he's like, who's Craig Russell?
Huh.
And I'm like, oh, this is not a good sign, man. You don't know who Craig Russell is. Yeah, okay.
Weren't they published by Dark Horse?
No, it was its own publishing company. I can't remember the name of it. I'd have to look it up.
Okay.
So what we did, what we thought would be fun this week was I just pulled a random digital comic and passed it out to us so we could all read it and just kind of talk about it. And this is Space Detective from 1951. Let me see. Let me share the screen. There we go. This is Space Detective, 1951. I wonder who did that. And it's funny because I did not read. I did not read the credits for this one.
Right.
Hey, where is until? Oh, it's going the wrong way. What? Go backwards. 11, 12. Come on. Which one of these moves it backwards? There we go. The forward arrow moves it backwards, and the backwards arrow moves it forward.
That makes sense.
And it was funny because and they give you a little intro page here to who Space Detective is.
Right.
And I was trying to just when I was reading this, I was trying to figure out who the artist was, and it reminded me a little of Frank Frazetta, but I didn't think it was him. And it reminded me a little of Wally Wood too. And it turns out but I didn't think it was him. It turns out it's Joe Orlando penciling and inking by Wally Wood.
Right.
So there's some talent to, and I also know the first thing I noticed is it's the Leroy lettering machine, which is just what they used in EC Comics.
Yeah. Did you notice in some of the panels there are some very interesting space variations in the letters there that they stick out like a sore.
Yes. I think that's how the Leroy lettering machine worked. If you, it was like a mechanical device.
Yeah.
That you like traced a letter in and then moved the next one next to it. So I'm guessing this letter was moving real fast.
Right. One of the other things I noticed too, the suit that he has there, it's drawn to look like chainmail.
Yes.
And I hope to God it's some futuristic material that's not actually chainmail, because chainmail pants are not made like that. And if you had some that were, boy, you would be sore as hell the next day.
What I found funny was they're what are their names again?
Think and Ray.
He's got a name, and her name is just Tina.
Yeah. But I think her hero name is stupid because her actual name is Dot Kenny. And when I was reading this, I thought I was trying
to find her actual name, and I couldn't. I'm like, what's it? Oh, the Avenger and Tina. That's it.
Tina.
And I was like, when I first started it, I was trying to find her actual name. And did they give her actual name in here?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's here. It's in his luxurious home in Great New York, Rod Hathaway, wealthy young philanthropist, is busy with his hobby, reliving the miseries of the poor. Dot Kenny, his secretary, is with him.
That's right. Dot Kenny. Somehow when I was looking for that, I didn't find it because I was like, why is her name just Tina?
Well, did you also notice there's no attempt whatsoever in giving them a secret identity? They just put their costumes on, and all of a sudden they're different,
No, and what's worse, they say that nobody knows that Rod Hathaway is the famous Avenger. So he's a famous philanthropist and a famous superhero, and he doesn't wear a mask, and nobody knows.
That's what I was getting at, right? There's no attempt,
I find it funny too because he puts on this chainmail armor, and she puts on a shirt with a bare midriff.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. If I didn't know this was from the 1950s, I'd swear this was a parody comic of imagining what the future retro would be, because this kind of merges styles from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and parts. You start with her name, Dot Kenny. It's like that's not a real name. That's something that she calls herself, and that's what they imagine that names people give themselves in the beginning of the internet era.
Right.
Because that's what it sounds. And the midriff open costume is more late 60s and early 70s, more a bit sexier than what would be normal in the 50s.
Yeah, this is 51 even.
Yeah. So if this was made now, I think it would make a lot more sense. Imagining what the future would be like, but where everybody was doing retro stuff.
But I think we also had this is a time in comics that we don't hear much about because I only know because I've read about a bit of comics history, but it's like after World War II ended, and it's like all the boys who came home from the war in America, they all comics were part of their K rations, so they all read comics when they were in the army, and they came home and they still wanted to read comics. Yeah. So the area from like 46 to like 51, 52, comics were really growing up. And you could tell that in this, because this isn't aimed at kids.
Right.
And I think the Bare Midriff is one of the parts that's aimed at slightly older readers. And it kind of reminds me of a cross between The Spirit, because of just the structure. It's actually like a 24-page story, but it's like 3 8-pagers. It's broken up into 3 8-page chapters. And something like Buck Rogers from the early 30s.
Right.
And like Buck Rogers was kind of adult, and so was The Spirit. So it had more of a sort of an adult theme than I thought it would. I mean, it was crazy. Right. But it was much more grown up than I thought it was, which I think happens, and that always surprises me because I haven't read a whole lot from that period. But when I do, it always surprises me how much less juvenile it is than from something like from 1961.
Well, I did some homework on that, and I found out at least one of the stories, if not all three of them, were about Walter Gibson, who did The Shadow.
Okay, so this 3-parter is probably by Walter Gibson, and because I like this. Where is it? This little thing down here. This little
printout, the medical
printout he had, the little cutout screen he had. I thought that was pretty neat, just the way that looked. Made it
the octagonal shape.
Yeah. They were trying.
One of the things they didn't do it on purpose back then, but there was a part where they were like listening to them using, in his office using a ray. There's actually a technique now where you can synthesize words from just light impulses on somebody's window. You can actually pick up and tell what
that's what it reminded me of. They were using their listening ray, and you're right. I have seen that too. It's like they can hear you by placing something up against the glass, and reading the vibrations of the glass.
But then the other rays they came up with, for all the different things in the story, reminded me of Space Ghost.
Right.
We've got a different ray for everything. Yeah.
Joe Orlando and the woody finishes on all the spaceships were cool.
Yeah. And the cloaking device that really didn't do anybody any good because they could see where they were.
and that was a strange cloaking device because it made the ship black so they could see against the stars.
Yeah.
And this was interesting too. That guy had some sort of cloaking disguise, but he was using his X-ray gun to see the metal rebuild in his knee.
Right.
I was like, that's not typical of 1961 comics. I mean, like you said, if Gibson did write this, that's some real science fiction stuff in there, even if it is a little corny and simple.
Right.
At times. But like I said, I was not this is better than I thought it would be. It's not great.
I've always been a big fan of retro science fiction. I always loved the Buck Rogers Flash Gordon kind of stuff. So.
I found it pretty interesting. I mean, I'd never really read much like this before.
Yeah, I remember when I bought those Golden Age of Marvel Comics volumes. The stuff, the post-war stuff before they instituted the Comics Code.
Right.
One of the stories there was a Venus horror story done by Bill Everett. That wasn't that bad, but the Marvel Boy story, also by Everett, was interesting to read. It wasn't that developed, but
Right.
you could read it and it's fun. And the Black Knight stories by Joe Manili, that was very well drawn.
Yeah.
Because that's when those guys who started in the late 30s, early 40s, they finally matured. They came back from the war.
Right.
And I remember the first time I saw the Crime Buster, and I was looking at it, and I didn't know what the Crime Buster was. I didn't know about Lev Gleason yet, but I was looking at it, and 1948, but this art is good because even the stuff from the late 30s, everybody says, "Oh, this is great," but it isn't.
Right, it's crude, man. They're just learning.
Yeah.
Hey, Jared, can you go back to the previous page for a second?
Sure. Let's see. That one is backwards.
All right. Look at the bottom panel,
Mm-hmm.
and you see that structural design in the cockpit window. Where have you seen that?
Yeah. I must have seen. That reminds me of Wally Wood.
What's that remind you of if you didn't have any other context?
I don't know. I don't know what you're getting at because it reminds me of a bunch. It reminds me of a bunch of things, but I can't think of anything specifically.
Reminds me of the Millennium Falcon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, I'm not that big a Star Wars guy, so.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but I also like on the next panel that nuclear explosion wasn't there a famous cover that was something like that? I'm trying to think. A nuclear explosion with sort of some figures, but that's really nicely done.
Right.
Like some of these comics from the early 50s are really surprise me about how, even though there's certain crudeness to them, but there's a certain sophistication too.
It's like that asteroid there that you can almost that very, very Wally Wood looking asteroid there.
Right. Oh. Some nice figure work. And the story was mile a minute too. There was a lot of like little sci-fi stuff in the story, and it was mile a minute. They're basically chasing down space crooks.
You didn't get a chance to breathe. Yeah.
No. They're chasing down space crooks in 3 separate chapters.
Right.
Until they finally catch the space crook. Look at that little space scene at the end there. That's pretty cool. The far out colors.
Mm-hmm.
Little spaceship. And this is where the villain made a mistake. He should have just let him die in space.
Yeah.
You know? But no, he was nice and was going to ransom them. But I guess he wanted to make money, so why kill the famous guy when you can ransom him?
There you go.
Well, when the famous guy is a highly capable law enforcement independent operative,
that might be a problem, yeah. And it turned out to be one.
And he already knew that he was a law enforcement operative, so yeah, everything he did was a mistake.
And I also liked the fact that the woman in this wasn't just in distress all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes
she could take care of herself.
Yeah. Sometimes he saved her. Sometimes she saved him.
Right.
So it was always
never
like
going around. Rod. I'm so glad that I work for you. They don't.
Yeah.
None of that in here.
She was just one of the heroes of the story. Something for the kids. And this is the one that I saw was Lucky Dale, Girl Detective. Mm-hmm. Was drawn by Warren, that's his name, Warren Kremer, who I'd never heard of before I read that Gold Key, that back issue magazine from like 15 years ago. Right. That was about Gold Key. Yeah. And he was the main art director at Gold Key. Oh. And he also designed drew a lot of their covers, designed a lot of their characters. And he was just like this really well-respected artist.
Gotcha.
Through his Gold Key years that I just never heard of because I didn't know anything about, 50s and 60s funny animal comics.
Sure.
But he's really talented if you see his Gold Key covers and stuff. But here's a little of his interior stuff from 51.
I think he was still active in the 80s. Wasn't he the one that was doing some of the Star Comics properties at Marvel?
He may have been. I'm
like
not sure.
In Top Dog.
Right, because the editor on there knew him from the old days, so I think he may have still been doing that stuff. Sid Jacobson was the editor at Star Comics at Marvel, and I think he had originally worked in the '60s, because Sid Jacobson was still there in the early '90s when I first started at Marvel, and I think he was was working, I think, in the '60s at Dell. And he knew Warren Kremer from there. So I'm sure when he was the editor of the Star Comics line, he probably hired Warren to do some stuff.
When you started at Marvel, Jared, was Al Williamson still inking people there?
He was inking. I never met him because he was out in Pennsylvania.
Right.
But he was still inking. He was inking J.R. Jr. then, I think.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Because it's funny, because I don't think of him as a inker at all. I've always think of him
as
a penciler, but
Right. He did all that stuff in the 50s and 60s and said he was the Star Wars guy. But the drawing on this was interesting. It wasn't the same type of illustrative drawing. He's using a lot of shapes and shadow and stuff. And look how they're using the color here. Like, you hardly ever, I mean, you didn't see color like that in a lot of comics in like the 60s that I've read. But here, on this, the color is getting really expressive at times. Dark blue in the background.
Right.
Patterns in the color. So it's kind of interesting what they're doing here.
Yeah, and you can tell that the story is set at night, which is also not usual. Even when you're doing crime comics at night, you see light everywhere.
Right.
Just this shot of her in the dress, just using like hints of shadow of that leg, and in that that's not usual.
No.
He's really using chiaroscuro there, as I think, and up here in these folds, it's different because a lot of guys at that time, if you look at those like EC comics especially. Where they had those really illustrative artists. Yep. They drew every single fold perfectly.
Yep.
I mean, like Al Williamson, who you just mentioned, is one of those guys. When you look at his work on like early Creepy, that guy could draw a suit like no one else. Every suit was perfect. Every fold was perfect. Right. These folds here are just like these. This is kind of how people do folds now because they don't know how to draw a suit. But he's doing something a little, I would think he knows how to draw a suit more. He's just going with some sort of more abstract patterns in the suits. But if you look at like superhero artists drawing suits nowadays, they can't.
Right. Well, they're not used to
draw suits. Yeah, they're not used to drawing suits, so they just can't draw them.
Another thing that always bugged me about modern artists is when they do Star Trek comics, is they give everybody a superhero physique.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is that? But no.
There it is. Okay. But overall, I think that this comic was a lot different than I expected it to be. For some reason, I expected there was an element of cheesiness to it.
Sure.
But it was a lot less cheesy than I thought it was. And it was...
It is well crafted. You don't think of Avon as doing comics.
No.
Especially because Avon was doing comics. Yeah. Right. It was because they were using the comics to fill up space with the printers and the distributor. Probably a business afterthought. But they must have been paying well because in the main story if they got Walter Gibson, because even if he came from pulps, he was making more money in pulps than in comics. Right. And then Orlando and Wood do a very, very good job. They're not just winging it for another paycheck.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if that was the beginning of. I think Joe Orlando started before Woody did, but I'm not 100% sure.
I'm pretty sure he did. Yeah.
I'm not sure how early in their career this. It must be early in Woody's career because he's just inking, I imagine. But he could have just wanted to ink. I don't know. I'd have to. But like you said, it was well done. The art especially. But I suppose, like I said, I found this on the internet, and I suppose someone posted it there because they liked it. It was good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but there's a couple of websites where they have all of these late golden age comics because they're from publishers who went out of business, and they're usually considered to be in the public domain. I'm not exactly sure if they're in the public domain, but ascertaining copyright and enforcing copyright is not on anybody's is not the main priority here. I mean, I don't see Avon Books nowadays going after people who are putting their 1950s comics on the web.
Right. Definitely. Let's see what some people had to say here. Matt Wagner had a hell of a time getting his rights back to Grage and Mendel from me, which is why he split them between Dark Horse and Image later. Oh, okay.
Of course,
took a long time to get back to Mage.
Yeah, but Dark Horse and Image don't operate like Kamiko did. So
no. Horatio Altoona is a great artist. I don't know Horatio Altoona.
Horatio Altoona. Let me see if I can find something for you.
It's not one I'm familiar with either.
So
Craig Russell.
What are his top stories?
Well, Craig Russell's been around a long time, but I'll tell you what, if you can find a trade paperback hardcover compilation of his Ring of the Nibelung saga, that stuff is fantastic.
I would say Marvel guys like his War of the World, his Amazing Adventures, Killraven, War of the Worlds from the 70s.
Right.
I'm a huge fan of his stuff from Epic Illustrated. He did a few stories in there.
Yeah, he did several.
He did some Elric stuff in the 80s that was great.
And then later on, he did more Elric stuff for Topps.
The last Elric thing he did, I forget the name of it, that he did for Dark Horse in like the 2000s, I think it was.
Yeah.
Is some of his best work I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's good. He's really well known for adaptation of operas and adaptations of Neil Gaiman work. That's what I was going to say. In the past few years, he's done a lot of adaptations of Neil Gaiman's work. But if you can find Salome's good, anything that Craig has done is good. But if you can find a compilation of the Ring of the Nibelung, the Ring Cycle, that's his prime opus.
I haven't actually read this yet. I got it for Christmas, I think. But this is one of his adaptations of Neil Gaiman's story.
Right.
And the reason I haven't, I'm not a huge Neil Gaiman fan. I think Neil Gaiman's a good writer. I'm just not a fan of the subjects he writes on. Like he did another one of adaptation of Neil Gaiman's work where it was about these angels in heaven and hell and that. And I loved the artwork.
Mysteries, and it's really good.
And I loved the artwork, but there's some Paul Chadwick in here too, and Charles Vess.
Yes.
And I loved the artwork, but the story, it's like I said, Neil Gaiman, I think he's a good writer. He just doesn't write things that I'm interested in. That's all it comes down to. I'm not interested in angels and heaven and hell. I hate living embodiments of things. That's why I'm not a Sandman fan.
Gotcha. He's
already got the living embodiment of death, the living embodiment of anger, the living embodiment of rock salt. I don't know. I'm just like, oh. But for some reason, I don't like that. I don't know why.
But I would recommend anything that Craig has ever done.
Yeah, me too. I'm a huge Craig Russell fan. I like all of it. I wonder how many times the phrase "wealthy young philanthropist" was used. You know what's interesting about that?
At least once.
I just read somebody's critique. I don't know how. Just on Twitter, somebody reposted it. Whatever. I don't know who the guy was, but he did this long critique of Batman.
Right.
And one of the things he said that rang true with me was that the reason that being a wealthy young philanthropist in the 40s, like Batman, was such an advantage was it gave Batman access to all this crime-fighting technology that the cops didn't have.
Right.
Now the cops all have that technology. So it's kind of like... and he was talking about, getting back to, but I found that little aspect of his whole critique of Batman interesting, is that being a rich guy doesn't buy you the crime fighting technology it used to. So that's, and you could see that even in that story, that space detective story, being that he had equipment that even the space cops didn't have.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I found that
the cops were a bit lazy. That's why they employed people like the Avenger.
Mine, the comics liked my wardrobe description. A charioteer. That's an artistic term that means shadow moving from dark to light, kind of.
Yeah,
thing.
it's from Italian.
That's a Da Vinci.
So what he had was a chia.
Oscuro.
So what he had was a chia pet.
I was asshole enough to tell Sean Phillips on Twitter he should upgrade his own suits. He didn't like it, but he was polite.
Well, Sean Phillips draws every suit like it's an Italian suit, and you know that Italian suits don't really wrinkle.
Well, going back to guys who drew suits and could draw every little fold in them, you would go all the way back to Will Eisner.
Right. Yeah. Well, Will Eisner had a little cartooniness to his suits.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
He was more abstract to his suit. Like Al Williamson drew them as realistically as you can draw a suit in comics. Yeah. Somebody
asked me one time about Al Williamson because he wasn't familiar with him. It's like, okay, you know what Han Solo looks like, right? Okay. Han Solo, it looks like a character Al Williamson came up with. It just walked right off the page.
Though I actually corrected not Sean Phillips. I corrected Ed Brubaker to Sean Phillips on Twitter once, but he appreciated it because it was in which book? It was the one after the Fade Out. About the vigilante guy. How come all of a sudden I can't remember the name of it? I can remember the name of all. It was about the guy in New York City who decided to become a vigilante, and he had some demon haunting him. Oh God, I can't believe. But anyway, he lived. He would often go, since it took place in New York City. He would often take the train up to Westchester to visit his mother. And in one panel, they had him coming back on the train from Westchester, and he just drew the train. He didn't draw the train station, but the caption was arriving at Penn Station. Now, the trains from Westchester don't arrive at Penn Station. They arrive at Grand Central, and they arrive at Grand Central Station, which is actually Grand Central Terminal, but that's a whole other thing. So I was like completely taken out of it. I was just like, what is he doing? It's like the trains from Westchester don't go to Penn Station.
Right.
So it's like, I was like completely distracted. The rest of I knew that I followed Sean Phillips on Twitter. I don't follow a lot of creators, but he was one of them I did. So it's like I went onto Twitter. I'm like, and Ed Brubaker's not on Twitter.
Right.
So like maybe you could tell Ed Brubaker that the train, you can change it for the. I'm like, you didn't, but because like if he had drawn Penn Station, it would have been a problem because Penn Station looks nothing like Grand Central Station, inside or outside. But it was just a caption. I'm like, tell Ed Brubaker that the trains come into Grand Central. So he's like, thanks, I'll tell him. And actually, for the trade paperback, they changed it.
That's cool.
To So I didn't tell him to upgrade his suits. I just told him to get the right station.
Oh, okay.
Oh, he mentioned Altoona for his involvement with Penthouse Comics.
Yeah,
there we go.
If you search for Altoona, most of the stuff you'll find is erotic comics, even stuff that he did for other publishers or that he published in Europe. He's Argentinian, but the Argentinians, if they wanted to make money, they would come to Europe because the French and the Italians would all publish tits out, and nobody would care.
So that's why Tim got confused about Argentina and Portugal the other day.
Yeah,
Killer Be Killed. There's the name that left my head. I think Pope Cerebus the First reads just about everything I read too. He collects a lot of indie stuff.
Gotcha.
But Killer Be Killed, that was the one that had the wrong. You should have seen me. as I was reading this, I mean, I couldn't concentrate the rest of the comic.
I can kind of understand where you like. Sometimes I'll read an historical comic, and there's something just so completely anachronistic or just flat out wrong. I was like, can I trust the rest of this?
Yeah.
And you're like, what happened? What's going on here?
All right.
Yeah. So, story set in the 30s. Somebody shows up and walks up to somebody. Hey, dude. Nobody called anybody "Hey, dude" in the 1930s.
As a matter of Phillips suits and the fade out and such all look cheap stuff bought and worn without any knowledge of proper fitting. Guys before the 70s knew better. It's my big. I can understand. Guys just don't know how to draw suits anymore. That's all it comes down to. Even the guys who draw suits all the time, like Phil, his suits aren't necessarily terrible like they are in superhero comics. But the guys who could draw suits in, like, if you look at early Creepy and Eerie, who are all the guys from the EC comic.
Yeah, Gray Morrow.
Same guys. They could all draw suits impeccably because everyone wore suits then.
That's true.
So they knew exactly how to draw suits. Now nobody knows how to draw suits. They just don't. They just fake the suit.
So we can't blame it on David Byrne videos anymore.
Well, people don't know how to wear suits either. I mean, even I have a problem doing the knot on the tie because nowadays everybody everybody lets the top button show. You're not supposed to, but everybody does.
Yeah.
The last time I wore a suit was when I went to a funeral.
Yeah, I haven't worn a suit in a while, except for my. I have a. Hold on a second here. I'll show you my Halloween zoot suit.
He's going to get the bat suit, isn't he?
Yeah, there was a time when I still had to wear suits if I went to a media presentation, but nowadays nobody cares. Everybody wears sneakers, even when we go to 5-star hotels.
Years ago, when I first started taking street photos, this is like early 2000s, I used to go down to New York City to the Halloween parade and take pictures of people around. Like, the actual parade was too crowded to take pictures of people. So I decided I wanted to dress up. So I ended up buying a zoot suit, and then I'd paint new things on it every year. So there's the back of it. That's one of my eyes. On the side, I have this lightning bolt in spiral. On this side, I have this red fist with nails and eyes in the fingers. On the end of it, I've got these like flames and pinstripes. And on the bottom of the zoot suit itself, I have more flames. And then on the front, I have a couple of my Modman characters with big eyes for heads. Once again, I painted the trim on it yellow. I painted the buttons yellow, and I painted that the buttons go through purple. And I think at the bottom of the pants, I painted the bottom of the pants just like the bottom of the coat. So the pants cuffs all have flames on them too.
Yeah. There are some places that if you wear that at night, people are going to look at you and they're going to freak out, and they think they're going to be on a bed trip.
Yeah. I used to, and this is like a real suit too. This isn't a Halloween zoot suit. This is like real, some Italian. I think I got it off of eBay. Like selling Italian zoot suits on eBay. It was like, $60 or $80 by Alberto Salini, Milan, Italy. So, though speaking of people freaking out, I have another coat that I have painted that I used to wear. That's a duster. So it's a long black duster, and I had the back painted, and on the shoulders, sort of like this, I had two. They were a little bigger than this. These are about 4 inches wide. Maybe the other ones were 6 or 7 inches wide, and they were on like the duster cape right here. There were two big eyes, and I'd be like walking down. So I was walking with my friend. I used to wear it all the time, so I paid no attention to it. But I was walking with one of my friends at one lunchtime at Marvel, and he just started laughing. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm like, what are you laughing at? He's like, you don't notice all the people? I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, people, as you're walking down the street, the eyes catch their eyes, and they just go, they just give a side-eye look because I got, like I said, the two big eyes just kind of catch everybody's eyes and freak them out a little bit.
Yeah.
I want to wear that again. I haven't worn it in so long because I haven't gone down to Halloween parade.
There you go.
Last time I wore a suit will be at my funeral. All right.
Yeah.
Black light suit. I actually knew when I was in college, one of my friends, this girl, she had glow in the dark tape. That she had a leather jacket, your typical leather motorcycle jacket, and she put glow in the dark tape like at different intervals all around the tape, all around the jacket, and it just looked like yellowish white trim most of the time. She's like, but when I go into a movie theater, it really freaks people out.
Gotcha.
Hey, you buy it on eBay if you know how to. Yeah, I didn't know how to, but I got a nice zoot suit. My coat of many colors. I have to close my blinds now and open my windows. I lost the light.
Have you seen the light? I've seen the light.
I don't see any light. It's 1 a.m.
But you're on the other side of the world. So.
Yes.
How does that work for flat earthers?
It's a conspiracy. It's not actually 1 a.m. here.
It's like, have you ever explained the concept of an eclipse to a flat earther?
It's a deep fake.
Yeah.
I really don't understand. I was reading. I was listening to a Michael Shermer podcast where the guest was talking about a conversation he had with a flat earther, and the guy spent like 2 hours trying to convince him of all this stuff, and he was almost getting to the guy, and then he leaves him alone for 5 minutes, and everything he talked about, the guy came up with the weirdest explanation to convince himself that everything that he'd been listening to for 2 hours was fake.
Yeah.
This is the Panama hat I've got in my my photo.
So between the ice cream man comment earlier in Panama now, am I detecting a Van Halen theme here?
I have a nice Stetson that goes with a black cowboy hat that goes with my my painted duster too.
Go ahead.
When you walk into a New York City subway with a long black duster and a black cowboy hat, sometimes people just move out of your way.
Yeah.
That's what the hat's for, is to take up space.
My wizard coat.
Yeah, I have a Stetson too because a colleague of mine once ordered a Stetson from the internet, and when it arrived, it was one size too small. So he gave it to me, and I brought it home. I never wore it. Then I gave it to my dad, and he still has to wear it outside. But because cowboy hats here in Portugal are very rare. Even with people that work with horses in the countryside, they don't wear cowboy hats.
They're not rare around here.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I used to ride the New York City subway.
The thing is, in New York, you can wear pretty much anything, and people.
Oh yeah, this one doesn't have the eyes on it, though.
Yeah,
but it's got the paintings on the back.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's how I used to ride the subway. My friends at Marvel used to call it my wizard coat.
Yeah. Actually, after Columbine happened, there's a few places, after that refused to let you in if you're wearing a trench coat.
Mm. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But then why would you get to a place you take off the trench coat? You're not supposed to keep it on.
By the way, that just reminded me, playing dress up, of my particular hypothesis on how cosplay started. Or I should say got popular.
Well, I can actually tell you the first historical documented cosplay.
What is that?
It was at a World Science Fiction Convention back in the 30s, and it was by Forrest J. Ackerman.
Ah, okay. But my idea of how it became popular in the 90s was somehow there have always been girls in high school or whatever who liked to sew. But it was never the coolest thing in the world. If you were the girl in high school who liked to sew, you kind of kept it to yourself, because sewing clothes was never anything that was cool or popular.
It wasn't just so, it was just so and so.
And then somehow in the 90s, those girls cross-pollinated with comic geeks.
Okay.
And it became, and if you could sew clothes that were costumes, that was cool.
Well,
and all of a sudden it became popular.
Well, plus they have ways, once the internet came, in a wide use, they have ways to communicate with each other and discover, hey, other people that like this. Yeah.
Right. And sewing costumes for Comic-Con suddenly became cool because there are people who think superhero costumes are cool, and there are people who think sewing is cool, and they kind of, and then there's of course the models who just people always want attention.
But the models kind of ruined the experience, because in the beginning, I think that when mainstream media started paying attention to San Diego Comic-Con, they looked at all of a sudden you have thousands of people all dressed up, and it kind of doesn't look ridiculous because you look at the suits and wow, these are really well made. This is good. This is good. It's visual, and you can show it, and you can put it on TV, and there's the people are happy. They're having fun, and so nobody's going to make fun of them for that.
It's the visual equivalent of a soundbite. Yeah.
Right.
But yeah, if you now you have the models with the professional-looking costumes, and
that's a whole different thing. That's them trying to. But yeah, like a cross-pollinated is it? It's like they just hey, we can do suddenly something that wasn't cool and you didn't mention. Suddenly there was an outlet. There was like one outlet for it, and it was like became cool somehow.
Have you ever seen any of Adam Savage's videos where he goes about how he builds some of his costumes?
No.
They're really interesting. He puts a lot of work into them.
The 1930s gangsters were cosplaying as themselves because they only started wearing those pinstripe suits after watching Cagney movies.
Ah.
Yeah, I can see that.
Let's see what else is coming out. There's an art of Frank Cho.
Oh. Yeah, that's been in the works for a long time.
20-year retrospective. All right. I generally like Frank Cho.
Yeah, I got into Liberty Meadows really early on.
Yeah. The only thing of his I have is University Squared.
That's even earlier. Yeah, that's
I really wish his nude Shanna the She-Devil existed. That was originally, do you know the Shanna the She-Devil story? Originally that was supposed to come out from Marvel Max, and it was supposed to be all nude. And I think he may have done like half an issue like that before everybody chickened out.
Yeah. Every time that Frank does something that has any nudity, people just start going nuts.
Yeah. And so I really wish that had happened. That would have been cool to see an all nude Shanna the She-Devil. I think they update this one every 10 years or so, or every 5 years. Marvel 80 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have the Marvel 70 Years magazine where they have all the previous editors and historians talking about the history of Marvel. It's actually pretty interesting. At the time, I found out some stuff that I didn't know.
Matter of fact, I'm trying to remember. I did I did a video on a Marvel covers or something, some kind of book like that I took out of the library last winter. Can't remember which one it was, but it wasn't a very good book. I don't know how this one's going to go.
I saw that they were going to reprint the official handbook of the Conan universe.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, because that's the only one who is actually still accurate.
Maybe.
Because the chronology doesn't change.
Right.
Star Wars Adventures. Anybody read any Star Wars comics here? I've never read that many.
I did when Dark Horse was doing them. I read a whole bunch of Star Wars comics, but But when they lost the license and it went over Marvel, honestly, I just did not trust Marvel to make a good book.
I never cared much about Star Wars Expanded Universe.
Yeah, neither did I. But it's funny because I can remember asking one of my friends, like in the 90s, because I know a lot. I'm not a big Star Wars fan, but I'm of the age where everybody's a Star Wars fan because it came out when everybody was 10, 8 to 12, anywhere from 8 to 12. So it's like all my friends who are in comics are Star Wars fans, yet none of them read the Expanded Universe books or comics. And I was always like, well, how come? I'm like, you're a comic book fan, you're a Star Wars fan, besides the Marvel stuff they read when they were kids. How come you don't read any Star Wars comic? And they're like, it's not Luke and Leia. That was the reason. Yeah.
There's so much more to the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, because I have Star Trek novels, and most of the ones I have are very good. And in every Star Trek novel, even if there's just one character, you will always find at least one character that people know. Otherwise, they
right.
Yeah, imagine that they wouldn't read it, but there's always one thing that people will recognize and they'll stay with it. And in Star Wars, you don't have that, because if you start speaking about the golden age of the Sith 6,000 years ago, it's 6,000 years ago.
Right.
Nope.
Well, the problem with Star Wars comics is there's just so much of them that it's just hard to keep up.
Yeah.
Here's one I didn't even notice before. The Unkindness of Ravens, #1, Dan Panosian and Mariana Ignazi from Boom Comics. I have no idea what the unkindness of... Whoops, there's a little tiny bit of art there.
I like the title.
Yeah, it's not all the witches burned during the Salem witch trials. The ones that survived did so together. Now, generations later, their descendants protect the ancient secrets entrusted to them. They call themselves the Ravens. Wilma is the new girl in school. She plans to go completely unnoticed, except that she bears an eerie resemblance to Raven member Waverly, and Waverly just went missing. The truth behind Waverly's disappearance will put the entire coven in danger, and Wilma will have to rely on power she never knew she had if she wants to save her new friends. Why you should care. This suspenseful supernatural mystery that is tailor-made for fans of Sabrina and Marked.
Okay.
What the heck
lost me now.
So I guess that's aimed at teenage girls?
Maybe it's just me, but every time I hear the word Wilma, I can't help but think of Wilma Flintstone.
Mike Douglas show where Wendy Penny makes an appearance dressed as Red Sonja. I remember that one.
I had very little on. Yeah.
Pope read the Darth Vaders. Okay.
Oh, but this one, it's not looking late, but it's Darth Vader. People will recognize Darth Vader, of course.
Panosian is great. So Pope Cerebus is going to be looking for the unkindness of Ravens. Not a Star Trek fan, but I'll read his Peter David Star Trek. I've my friend Rob is a huge fan of that.
I absolutely love the New Frontier series.
I don't understand that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, the New Frontier series. It recycles a lot of those one-shot characters who appeared in TNG,
right?
Including Commander Shelby from that Borg two-parter.
Yeah.
She marries the main star of that title, which is a new character. And then Peter David starts bringing in the characters from the animated series, Erex and Mares, and they become part of the cast. Then one of the best books is the one where they bring back Apollo from that original series.
Right.
episode, and they bring the whole of his family, and they basically have to fight all the gods.
Oh God!
And they make fun of the they make fun of the original series. It's a bit of fun because they're having there's a part where they're having a conversation, and they say, that people used to make fun. Used to think that Kirk faked all of his reports because it was just impossible for the ship to run into all of that stuff all the time.
Right.
Uh-oh. Who wants to hear about X, Swords of Creation?
Oh, God.
Where is it? The next X-Men event. No, there's that one there.
Yeah, nobody cares about that. No.
Next.
No. You have to hear this. I swear they cut and paste the same copy all the time. A tower, a mission, a gathering of armies. The next great X event begins here and continues into various X-Men series over the next 3 months. They could just cut and paste that every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You changed a few of the words. It's Mad Libs. Instead of a tower, a sword. It's a building, a secret facility. A hero comes.
His name is Aragorn. Wait a minute. I've read this book before.
Now, here's something interesting amongst Absolute Carnage Omnibus. I can skip that. Black Widow Omnibus. I can skip that. Oh, it's got some old stuff in the Black Widow one, at least. A lot of Silver Age stuff. But.
Well, the Black Widow probably has the Amazing Adventure series, which is
actually. It's got our Tales of Suspense stuff from the Avengers, stuff from Amazing Spider-Man '86.
Yeah, that's the first time Black Widow looks like the Black Widow. She has the catsuit.
Amazing Adventures 1 through 8, Bizarre Adventures 24, Marvel Fanfare 10 through 13. That's the
Paris,
the George Perez stuff. Oh, so the Black Widow gets some.
That Bizarre Adventure story is as art by Paul Galassi, and the characters look like they're in an old 30s movie.
Okay.
Then
I have that story somewhere in one of those Brazilian magazines that reprinted black and white Bizarre Adventures.
Now, this one's interesting because I'm not sure if Marvel's publishing it or not. It's Atlas at War graphic novel, and it's a collection of Atlas comics, Marvel Atlas comics from the 50s, except it says here the publisher is named Dead Reckonings, and it says,
interesting.
Did you even know that Atlas did war comics? Well, it did, and Dr. Michael J. Vasallo has picked 50.
I know that name.
They've been working on that for years, trying to get the right stuff to reprint, and then convincing Marvel to go ahead with the project.
I'm wondering. He's the one who writes all those really interesting intros to the Atlas editions of Marvel Archives.
Yeah, I have his book with the history of Marvel Comics before they started publishing comics. About the pulp magazines that Martin Goodman used to edit. Here's something in here, and it says it's what is it? All meticulously restored by Alan Harvey, and one of the reasons he probably has to meticulously restore it is in the Marvel used to have warehouses. Their first warehouse in the 90s, it was in Brooklyn. And all of their, like when you do publishing, you end up with things like film and stats for your archive. Where if you want to, it used to be before the computer days of digital publishing, if you wanted to reprint Spider-Man #1, you needed a copy of Spider-Man #1 to print from. Not a comic book copy. You needed what's called a photostat. It was sort of a high quality, it was mostly like a photocopy, but it was high quality on photographic paper. So that's what Marvel and DC was especially good at archiving everything.
they had all their stuff going back to the 40s. They still do, I'm pretty sure. And Marvel had this in a warehouse in Brooklyn. Eventually, Brooklyn got too expensive, so they moved it to a warehouse in Arizona. And then when Ike Perlmutter ended up owning Marvel, and he's the world's cheapest man, and we were digitizing, he wanted to get rid of all the warehouses. Mm-hmm. So he would have people in the warehouses looking for what he could get rid of. He ended up selling a lot of it on eBay. The owner of Marvel Comics selling stuff on eBay. That's how nuts he is. But also what ended up happening was some of it got sent back to the New York offices to be scanned in for digital archiving now. Mm-hmm. But one day, I was in the office. This is like 2003. I just happened to go into this one part of the office because I saw an intern with a paper cutter, guillotine paper cutter, cutting up old stats and film. And I was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "This is what they're having me do." I'm like, "What are you cutting up old stats for?" He's like, "This is all Marvel's old romance stuff. They want this stuff never to see the light of day. They think it's embarrassing."
Oh,
so they just destroy. I don't even know. They just destroyed. I don't know how much stuff they destroyed besides that. They may have destroyed all the Atlas stuff, the Atlas War stuff. That's why this guy has to reconstruct it. Mm-hmm. But he's like, "Do you want any of it?" I should have said. I was just like, I didn't have room for stacks, so I should have taken it though. Now, in hindsight, I'm like, I should have just taken it all home.
It's kind of like hearing the stories about Ditko would use some of his old original pages to cut things on, and it's like, oh my god.
That turns out that was just a story. That wasn't true.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, that's good.
Ditko. What he was actually cutting on was some like half-finished page that he abandoned.
Okay.
So it was like some page it was just, a page that got ruined. So he used it as a ruined page. That's where that story comes from. I read that, from whoever was the originator of that story, like cleared it up.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. But the stories of Bill Sienkiewicz having his artwork all on his floor of his studio and actually stepping on it are true. That I've heard from witnesses of that. He just, like, when he was done with pages, he just like put them on the floor over there, and sometimes he'd end up stepping on them, just be like, "Oops."
Yeah.
Big footprint on them. Yeah, but it's just like they destroyed all the romance stuff. I know for sure. Who knows how much other stuff Marvel destroyed because Ike Perlmutter and Bill Jemas didn't think it represented Marvel properly.
That's the romance stuff is the second rarest stuff from the Timely Atlas days because the funny animals, a lot of even the in the Grand Comics database, the funny animals are the comics that they still haven't indexed. They still don't know what characters show up there, who did what. They don't even. There aren't even that many people that can identify the artists because there aren't that many experts on funny animals like there are with superheroes and science fiction and horror.
Sure.
Yeah.
Plus, a lot of people that actually worked on those books aren't around to ask anymore either.
Yeah, that's the big problem.
Yeah, because they had, like I said, back in, they don't have this anymore since everything's digital. But they used to have an art returns guy. That was a job at Marvel because, back before people scanned their artwork and sent it digitally, the artwork had to physically go to the office.
Yep.
And so there was one guy who was in charge of sending that back to he took care of all the art. He split it up between the inker and the penciler, and he made sure that artists got their work back. That was his job. Wilson Ramos was the last guy to do it, I think. So I remember going into his office in the early 2000s, and he had a pile of artwork from like the 60s in there. And he was just like, I was like, "Oh, what's all this doing here?" He's like, "We don't know who drew that. We're still trying to find out who drew those pages so we can return them." to
the appropriate,
proper people. I don't know whatever. I think Wilson got fired before those pages were ever returned, so I don't even know what happened to him. Neither does he. So it's amazing what gets thrown. And I can remember. I don't remember ever asking anyone about this, but you know about Jack Kirby getting his pages returned to him in the whenever it was.
Right.
And he had to fight hard to get his pages back, and then he had to sell a lot of his pages to pay the lawyers.
Right.
But it was like in the early 90s. I can remember, and in fact, I think it was Tom Brevoort. He was new there or whatever, and he had to go into Marvel had some locked closets there that had artwork in them, and Tom had to go in there for some reason and get something. So we went in there, and he just happened to open the closet as I was walking by, and I looked in the closet, and there was Jack Kirby pages in there, and I'm just like, why would there be Jack Kirby pages in a locked Marvel closet in 1991?
Right.
And I was very new there and didn't know who to ask. I wish I had found out what was going on with those, because there was no reason that I knew to have Jack Kirby pages locked up in a closet in 1991.
Well, Tom was still new at the company, so he had no reason to lie to you. You could have asked him.
Yeah, I know. I didn't even think of it at the time. Like I said, he was new too. I don't even know. He just happened to be the one going into that closet. I think it was him.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if even he knew, because I barely knew him at the time. He would probably know better now since he's been there for so long. But Tom Brevoort's greatest strength is his greatest weakness. In that he's actually a pretty smart guy who has good ideas about comics. But he will do the boss's idea with as much enthusiasm as his own. Even if it's a bad idea he thinks is going to fail, which is one of the reasons he's lasted there so long.
Right.
Because like a lot of people, when your boss gives you a bad idea, especially if you don't like the boss, you want us to, there's a bad idea coming, because that's the way the creative process works. You have to be able to say this is a bad idea. But a lot of times when you say this is a bad idea to your boss too much, your boss doesn't like you. And the first chance he gets to get rid of you, he gets rid of you.
Right.
Even if it's your job to tell your boss it's a bad idea, it can be a problem. Tom Brevoort, like I said, even when he knows it's a bad idea, even when he thinks it's going to, and also when people think it's a bad idea, they half-ass it. And so when you half-ass your boss's bad idea, he's really not going to like you.
Yeah, because it's your fault that his idea fails.
If you didn't half-ass it, it would have worked.
Yeah.
Tom Brevoort, like I said, he will give 100% to that bad idea, which is why when you read, you can see him, if you go onto Marvel page, you can hear him defending bad ideas all the time. And you'd think it was his idea how he defends it. You will think, I've seen so many people online say Tom Brevoort is an idiot because he's defending bad ideas, But like I said, you will never know. You in the outside world will never know he thinks it's a bad idea. And that's his strength. But like I said, it's also a weakness because it makes him make a lot of bad comics that he'll get blamed for. He's made good comics too when he can make them on his own. It's like I said, he's actually has some good ideas about comics. There are some kind of classic comics that he edited from Marvel, and that you're like, oh, that I know, I'm like, oh, that must have been his idea. He must have actually liked that one and thought it was a good idea. But most of them are just terrible comics. But that, like I said, but that's how he's lasted so long.
Yeah, back in 1999-2000, I was on an Avengers mailing list called the West Coast Avengers mailing list. It was called that way because it was a successor to the original Avengers mailing list. And Kurt Busiek was a regular member. We got Tom for about 4 or 5 months. Then he quit. He can if he had an internet altercation, he would go away. He didn't want to have to deal with that person anymore, even if it was just something mild. Because in Usenet, where it was public, he literally told people to go fuck themselves. He
is not the most socially adept guy.
Yeah,
he's a comic book nerd.
But it was usually recognized that since he was editing the Avengers, he was editing Thunderbolts, which the Avengers people like. And it was generally recognized that he had a very good understanding of continuity and what the characters were about, how to evolve the characters over a long period of time, and making sure that the creators were doing their best work. And that he should be in line to one day succeed Bob Harras. And I kind of wonder how much how much he felt second, if he ever felt second rate when Joe Quesada came in.
And I would imagine so. But like I said, he'd never say something like that. He would always, even if he had better ideas than his boss, you would never know. Well, we in the office, he might say something to. Like we in the bullpen, didn't matter if he said something to us. We're nobody's boss. Yeah. So he might say something because we'd be discussing it, and we could tell he didn't think it was a good idea. But his boss wouldn't be able to tell, and the public wouldn't be able to tell.
Gotcha.
He would give it 100% effort.
Yeah, I think Quesada knew how good he was because he kept when it was the reshuffle and Quesada became an executive, and they got Axel Alonso to become the editor-in-chief. They gave Tom which was the equivalent of Mark Grunwald's old position, which essentially made him a number 1.5 in the editorial department. So
I don't even know what those positions do. Even when I never quite understood what Joe Quesada did, even when I was there.
Yeah,
we always assumed it never quite happened, but we rank and file always assumed Joe Quesada was there so they could blame stuff on him. Because he wasn't one of the corporate hierarchy boys, but still he managed to survive all these years. So he really never got stuff blamed on him like that. So I was surprised to see him survive as long as he has, because we really all thought we're like, well, he's going to be the scapegoat sometime, because he's not really one of the
scapegoats. Because you'll remember that Bob Harras was still editor-in-chief when Ultimate Spider-Man came out, but Quesada got all the credit.
Yeah. Well, I think Bob Harras wore out his welcome too.
Yeah,
he was not particularly well liked over the years. But like I said, I think that's because I don't know if I said this on this channel before, if I was talking to you guys or not. That when Bob Harras became editor-in-chief at Marvel, I saw his sort of editing style change, and that made me realize that the editor-in-chief job is really kind of whimsical, meaning it's run by whatever whim the editor-in-chief has. Because when Bob Harras was editor of the X-Men, that was kind of easy, because the X-Men were all the best-selling books. All the creators got royalties from it, which meant if you were drawing the X-Men, you got more money than if you were drawing Captain America. So everybody wanted to draw the X-Men. So Bob Harras had his choice. He was in the the driver's seat. He had his choice of whatever great artist wanted, because everybody wanted to work. He could cherry pick the best artists at Marvel and have them draw the X-Men. So that made the job easy. When he became editor-in-chief, all of a sudden he was in charge of the whole line. So now he doesn't have all successes. He's got the whole range of successes to mid-range to failures that he's in charge of. And how do you make the failures not failures? And how do you make the mid-range into successes? You can't just cherry pick the top guys anymore. Now you've got to find guys to do the failure books. And you know what? The top guys aren't going to want to do the failure books. You're going to have to pick guys who are just breaking in, guys who are maybe more unreliable. So now all of a sudden, your tried and true method is now, how do I do this? Let's try picking guys with the last name that starts with B this month. And that's what actually happened. He would start making like sort of whimsical decisions, which I actually saw Tom DeFalco kind of make before him, sort of the same, where you're kind of like, you go because you're going with your gut so much because there's nothing else to base it on, where you're saying, oh, I think this will work. I'm going with my gut. I think this will work. But the next day, your gut tells you something different. Right. And you're like, ooh, let's not do that. Let's change that around a little bit and do this. But the person working under you who has to do the changes is like throwing their hands up in the air in their papers because the stuff is changing by whim. They're not seeing. They're like, oh, today he liked this guy, yet tomorrow he's not going to like him. So, but I think that's the job. Because, like I said, I saw Tom DeFalco doing similar things, and I just assumed it was Tom DeFalco. Kind of maybe that was his editing style, being a little whimsical. Right. But when I saw Bob Harris take the same job and take on some of the same traits, I was like, it's the job. It's not the
person.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the person.
Sure.
It's funny you're talking about somebody going through and listening like. Let's try, people who's, letters would start with B. And I'm thinking, poor Mike Zeck is saying, how come I don't get any work anymore?
No, but yeah, I imagine that you have to go up to the boss and explain why is the Paramount Comics line not selling, and what's this Uncanny Origins book that sells for 99 cents, but nobody wants to buy it because that was I remember what the $1 line, but it's like because one of the things that people complain about the price of the $2 comics is that maybe the comics should cost $1, and that was actually Tom coming on the internet and telling, well, since if the comic costs half, we need to sell double, and we don't sell double.
I also heard Tom Brevoort say that one of the problems with the dollar comic, like with I think it was Untold Tales of Spider-Man, is when people see a cheap dollar comic, they think it's not as good as the $2 comic, so they don't buy it.
I actually didn't understand that one, although given that it was at the time that there was the obsession with the value of comics, people may have thought that. To me, it doesn't make sense.
I was just the second in commands always get looked over at Marvel. They looked over Brevoort just like over Grunwald for Harris. Yeah, I think Brevoort is I don't even know what his job is now. He's like publisher. Or he might be in charge of something. I forget what. But that just reminded me. I was listening to a Rob Liefeld podcast about the Heroes Reborn days.
Yeah,
and he said something about that just jogged my memory. That at the time, Marvel went away from an editor-in-chief into 5 group editors.
Yeah.
So Bob Harris was one of the group editors. Mark Grunwald was another group editor. I think it was Bobby Chase. I can't remember who the other 2 group editors were off the top of my head.
Was it Danny Fingeroth on Spider-Man?
Maybe it was Jim Salicrup. I don't know if he had there.
Jim Salicrup was already at Topps at the time, I think.
He was already at Top, so yeah, it could have been Danny. But anyway, that's when Jerry Calabrese took over as publisher and made that deal with Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee. And Rob Liefeld said, he talked about how the time there were 5 editors, and Jerry said they were moving back to 1 editor-in-chief, and Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee lobbied hard for Bob Harris because he was their X-Men editor. And he said, I'm not going to tell you who missed out on the job, but I assume it was Mark Grunwald, just because he would have been in line for it. But I think they swayed. That's how I think Bob being the X-Men editor swayed it too, because that was the most successful line.
Yeah,
But
I would have done it. Just
Carl Potts and Bob Budiansky. Yeah, they were the other two. Bobby Chase. What did I just say? Bobby Chase, Bob Harris, Mark Grunwald, Bob Budiansky, and Carl Potts. That sounds familiar enough. Yeah. Untold Tales was a rollick. Everyone liked Untold Tales, but still it didn't sell, even though it was $1 book. Still, it did not sell.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Grunwald was the one who in charge of the line that sold less in general because it was all the Avengers books. It was the books that they gave to the Heroes Reborn guys. So yeah, I mean, if I was the CEO, if I was the president of the company and they asked who's going to be the editor in chief, I'm not going to get the guy who sells the less.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, you're going to get the guy who sells the most.
Can you imagine 15, 20 years ago, somebody told you that Avengers would be like the best-selling movie of all time?
Yeah,
you're like, what?
No.
Yeah,
because the Avengers was an afterthought in the 90s.
Yeah,
it really was.
Yeah, but this only happened precisely because the Avengers was bad in the 90s. Because when they sold all the movie rights to get the company's cash flow back in line after the bankruptcy, they sold the rights to the stuff that sold well, which was X-Men, Spider-Man, the Hulk, Punisher, and nobody cared about the rights to the Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man. So when they have Marvel Studios, what do they have? They have the Avengers. If they had not sold the rights to Spider-Man and the X-Men, we would never have had Avengers movies.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true. Quesada and Palmiotti, when they were gearing up for Marvel Knights, eventually to Max, they were at a folding card table booth behind the Marvel booth. I said, I can. Here's an interesting thing about Marvel Knights. I actually, because of the observations, if you go to radiantcomics.com, my webcomic and blog, I actually wrote a piece on what Marvel was like during Heroes Reborn, what it was like, and just kind of the general atmosphere of Marvel, and how since they were farming it out to Liefeld and Lee, nobody at Marvel wanted to succeed, of course, because there was all sorts of rumors that they're going to farm out all the comics, that they would close down Marvel and license it, all the same rumors that are going around at DC right now. Mm-hmm. And I had a couple of old Marvel people proofread it for me and just give me some ideas. And one of them said something interesting. Because Marvel Knights happened pretty soon after Heroes Reborn. But Quesada and Palmiotti moved Marvel Knights in-house. So they took offices at Marvel and had, even though the first couple issues didn't come through Marvel and didn't come through the bullpen, after like the first issue or two, they had everything coming through the bullpen. And the one person was like, I think they learned from Heroes Reborn that everybody at Marvel was pulling for Heroes Reborn to fail, because otherwise it meant their jobs. That Quesada and Palmiotti learned from that and said, hey, let's bring it in. We don't want to do this out on our own. Let's bring it in-house. And they were still in charge of it, and they still had their own budget, but all of Marvel's staff was working on it so that they had a stake in it. No one at Marvel had a stake in Marvel Knights failing. We wanted it to succeed because it was in-house, while we wanted to see Heroes. So I'd never thought of that before. Palmiotti and Quesada learned the lesson of Marvel Knights. Bring it in-house. Even though you're still the editor on it, even though you're still hiring everybody, bring it in-house and have all the staff people we need work on it.
See, that behind-the-scenes story is far more interesting to me than the books would have ever been.
Yeah.
I remember a story at the time because since Marvel Knights was an immediate big hit, that they wanted to try and put the Marvel Knights logo on stuff that they didn't do. Yeah. There was a Moon Knight miniseries by Mark Texeira. I remember that miniseries being specifically talked about, that they wanted to put the Marvel Knights logo on it, but Quesada said no.
Tommy brings up an interesting point. I wonder how many people over in England, over a certain age, so like 40 or 50 or so, be like, "What the hell are they talking about?" You know?
Yeah, I can remember all grown up. That was the Avengers. Everybody knew.
Yeah, Stephen Peele.
Yes, parlayed that by getting solid. Yeah, I think Joe really he parlayed. Well, like I said, that bringing it. They were probably at the card table behind the booth because nobody at Marvel wanted them to succeed before they brought it in house.
Mm-hmm.
Because like the first two issues, I know that at least the first issue of Marvel Knight stuff was all produced outside of Marvel, which is also why all the production on it was pretty bad. It was all over the digital files were a mess. But anyway, with like the second, third, maybe fourth issue, everything was in house, and I think that's what got them in with Marvel. If they didn't do that, Joe Quesada would have never gotten that job. You know, where he wouldn't be here he was today. Did you hear about Gemma supposedly helped kill the deal of having Jim Lee take? I haven't gotten to that part yet, but it wouldn't surprise me because nobody in the New York offices wanted anybody outside to take over.
Right, but Jim Lee couldn't. Gemma's wasn't there yet, and Jim Lee had already sold out to DC.
I haven't listened to this part yet, but I think it's during the bankruptcy years.
Right.
First of all, Marvel's bankruptcy was historic. If you read the Comic Wars book about it, it's great. But I didn't know it until I read that most bankruptcies take 3 to 4 months. Marvel was in bankruptcy for 20 months. And the reason they were in bankruptcy for 20 months was everyone wanted to own it.
Yeah, I do remember that there was a bidding war. It wasn't so much a bidding war. It was backstage. It was always in the backstage. It was trying to get the banks to go. We need to sign. Yeah.
And it was and it was just like I said, everybody was fighting over Marvel because everybody knew it was a meal ticket. It was, the goose that lays the golden eggs.
Right.
So that Jim Lee, so it's like Jim Shooter put together a bid on Marvel. It's like everybody was putting together a bid on Marvel. So I don't know if this was during that period or not. I can only listen to Rob Liefeld for so long before I have to stop, I mean, I don't know him personally.
Yeah, Jim Shooter was mentioned, but he had one guy that was going to pay, but he was nowhere near the running. It was Perlman and Ike. It was Perlman and Icon.
Yeah, it was Carl Icon, and the only reason Perlmutter got it was because the judge just woke up one day and decided he was going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's crazy. It's insane.
Yeah, but it's actually good because Icon was involved with Transworld Airlines.
Right.
He broke apart Transworld Airlines, and nobody. He might have broke. It was not going to save the business. It was to shut down.
Yeah. The Carl Icahn was not going to save anyone's jobs. That's not what he ever does. The Q effect. All right. Tom Marvel Knights, all the dark hair. I say mess. Yeah, they did. Quesada and Palmiotti did a pretty good job getting books out on time. I mean, they were good editors in general. But like I said, moving the stuff into Marvel, they're taking artist submissions at their folding table. Yeah,
and they were experimental. You can see
that they were trying to make good comics. But like a lot of that, one of the things I point out in my essay about working on Heroes Reborn at the time is Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld had a free hand to do what they want. The editors at Marvel did not. The editors at Marvel were constantly being told one thing one day and another thing the next day. And there was one plan from the guys upstairs one day and another plan the next day. So they almost had no choice but to be conservative in their choices.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they did anything, the nail that sticks up gets pounded down. If they did anything that got noticed, they'd be in trouble.
Mm-hmm. There was one thing that you guys had to waste time on. I mean, did anyone at the office care about the Paramount Comics label? The Star Trek comics?
Those were the licensed ones. Probably not that much. Licensed comics always fell by the wayside because they cost more to produce.
Yeah.
Speaking of licensed comics, Marvel's going to be reprinting a lot of the Alien stuff that was done by Dark Horse. And both Steve Bissett and Mark A. Nelson have come out on Facebook and saying they're not getting any royalties, any comp copies, nothing, because their contracts were considered to be work for hire.
Yeah, it's crazy what this. It was like the Marvel people. Well, the Marvel people were already getting no royalties from the Dark Horse,
right?
Printing as a comic. So now the Dark Horse people get no royalties from the Marvel, from the because that's all that stuff is owned by Lucasfilm, which is owned by Disney. So
it's. I mean, granted, I realize it's a business, but it is just.
It's not nice.
It's sad that somebody can't do the right thing.
Yeah,
because there's so much money floating around.
Yeah, and it's coming to the comics, and especially if they say that they only want to make the comics cheap to produce. One of these days they're going to notice that somebody's going to notice. It's probably somebody who doesn't have power to make decisions or to sign checks, but they will notice that they're not attracting talent and they're just pushing for trademarks, and that's going to move in a direction that the readers will also notice, and and especially if they insist that they want to get readers outside of the current system. Nobody who doesn't read comics is going to pick up a 2022 Marvel comic and say, "Wow, this is amazing." It's going to be written by guys with no imagination, drawn by idiots who can't hold up a pencil.
Drawn by computers.
Yeah, but they're going to look at it and, man, this is stupid.
Yeah,
I don't know this.
It doesn't look good. It looks dark and murky and like
So all the guys doing all these crowdfunded stuff, they seem to have a mission thrust upon them to save the industry in the United States.
Yeah, like I said, the
crowdfunding business model.
Right. Crowdfunding is good if you're an established artist.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you're a guy with no fan base, it's no help.
Yeah, but what the guys do is they have YouTube channels. They talk on the YouTube channels. And then when they decide, I'm going to make my comic, and their YouTube fans buy the comic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's guerrilla marketing, kind of like how the independent guys had to market themselves, back in the 80s and 90s. So.
But it's tough. What was it? Like one of the best-selling comics of a few years ago was based on like Angry Birds or something. I forget which one. One of those little apps that got really popular. And the app maker put out a comic too, and the comic sold like 1 million copies because 20 million people were playing the app.
Yeah. But
I don't think anything ever
wasn't
came of
in
that.
the direct market. It wasn't in the direct market. And since all the comics news is set up to talk about the direct market, which is why when Raina Telgemeier showed up, who's this Raina Telgemeier? What do you mean she sells 1 million copies? I've never heard of her.
Right.
And the guy that I can't remember his name, but the guy that does Captain Underpants now.
Yeah.
I mean, technically is considered the best-selling cartoonist in the world right now.
Yeah.
And Keanu Reeves is making a comic right now too. That's right. I remember seeing that.
Yeah. There's a Captain Underpants graphic novel in Portugal. I remember seeing it. I never even picked it up to look at it, but it's published by a book publisher, not by a comic publisher.
Right.
So they get it in bookstores, they get it in libraries where kids can. They get it in supermarkets. No, you can't. Nobody sells comics in the supermarkets anymore, but you can find Captain Underpants in the supermarkets in the book section.
That's because it costs money to sell comics in the supermarket.
You used to see Archie Digest, maybe, but not even those anymore.
That's because they paid for placement.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So and other comic book companies never wanted to pay that money, which I don't blame them too much.
Sure.
Because especially Archie's better for that because they're kind of evergreens. You don't really have to get the new issue out every month. Mm-hmm. And they're digests, so they're a little more sturdy.
Right.
Yeah, and Keanu Reeves I just saw is making some comic too.
Yeah. Yeah, and Stallone made a comic too with Chuck Dixon.
Yeah, modern colors now. That's what I was complaining. The problem is the art often suffers. That's what I was complaining about in this comic. It's one of there's no inks comics. It's all done with drawing and the coloring, but it's not done well.
Right.
There's no clarity to it.
Yeah, the inks are not just about shadows. They also had depth, and those colors they don't have any depth.
Right.
The usual depth perception.
Inking is about clarity in storytelling and clarity in printing.
Right.
And there's no clarity in storytelling. There's no clarity in printing.
It really depends on the artist because I've seen a couple of artists, Kerry Nord, when he was doing the Conan stuff with Dark Horse, and
some guys are good at it.
Some of Gray Marwa's stuff has been just shot straight from the pencils, and it looks really good.
It may look good, but it won't necessarily read good. That's the problem with, especially guys are better at it now. But the problem is one of the things an inker does is he makes a lot of storytelling decisions.
Sure.
About where your eye is going to look. The penciler doesn't think about that stuff. He's thinking about drawing. And sometimes just like the penciler like scribbles in a black. And that draws your eye to it when it's not supposed to.
Yeah.
And there's stuff like that a penciler does, which isn't a finished technique. He's not thinking about the final, how it's going to read. So that there can be some guys have gotten better at it than they were 20 years ago. Kerry Nord's Conan, he was pretty good at it.
Yeah.
But not everyone is.
The colorist doesn't think how to add the inking tricks.
Right.
He's never had that. They've never had that kind of that kind of job before.
No.
So there's a lot of color. And another thing that just got into my mind. Do they even do color proofs?
The colorist never see it, I don't think. The colorist won't see it until it's printed. He may print it out on his own home printer, but that's it.
Yeah.
They never send color proofs to the colorist.
Speaking of colors, Tom Luth is retiring.
Ah.
He did his last issue of Usagi Yojimbo last week. And he's retiring.
Always liked his Usagi. Yeah. Well, I think we're coming up on 9 o'clock, so we should wrap this up. I'm getting tired.
Yeah. It's almost 3 hours.
We've talked about everything under the sun, too.
Yeah, and we don't even have to repeat ourselves too much.
Not too much.
I noticed that.
And we don't even have to repeat ourselves too much.
No, but I noticed we sometimes we remember things that we've already talked about, but we don't go over the same subject in the same way.
I could though if you get me talking about certain subjects, certain artists, you bring it up like, that's my boy.
I'm like, I think I talked about some of this stuff with just Tim, so I'm like, I want to check to make sure you guys haven't heard it yet. Okay. So and that's what I was always doing. All right. Well, next week we'll have Tim back, and we'll be on his channel. That's why I named this one 21.1, just like they do with all the mini-series now.
But we still get the regulars, because I just remember if I were to host a show, the regulars wouldn't know because most aren't subscribed to my channel.
Right.
All right. Well, you guys out there have a good week, and I'm going to end the broadcast, and we'll catch you next week. Dismissed.
Goodbye.